When is it smart to pretend to be stupid? There was this Chinese restaurant near where I live. Years and years ago, a guy came in and handed the greeter a note that said, "I have a weapon, give me your money." The woman examined the note and then handed it back to the man, shaking her head. "You want food? What do you want to eat?" The man began to quietly explain that he had a piece. "Gum? What gum? We don't sell gum. You want chicken?" While she was busy with this guy, one of the chefs in the back caught on to what was going on and called the cops. Of course, the greeter spoke perfect English. It can be easier to pretend to be dumb if you know a lot about a topic, and someone is trying to give you poor advice on that topic, and you don't really feel like spending the next 30 minutes trying to make them understand the error of their ways. When your family asks you to fix their computer, the first time you do it, every problem they have down the road is going to be on you. My mum has called me from 300 miles away to have me fix some computer issues of hers. I end up having to remotely access her computer with Join Me, and it's a pain. I have to say, click on the orange button. I don't see it. It's right in the middle of the homepage. It says About. Should I click on About? No. We provide a variety of services. No, go back, and have offices in 15 countries, including… Just avoiding telling them you know anything works even better if, like the narrator, you have a brother who knows nearly as much or slightly less about computers, but is a nicer person who isn't a liar like you are. Maybe this tactic can sacrifice him to the parents and save your sanity. I heard a story about a Chinese-Australian kid getting busted for not having a train ticket. When the inspector confronted him, he responded in this very heavy, "What? I no understand," ignorant Asian migrant accent. Eventually, the inspector gives up and just tells him the rules and to have a ticket next time. After the inspector leaves, the kid turns to his mates and says in a perfect Aussie accent, "Frick, I love being Asian." My father had this habit that my mother has constantly reminded me of since he died. No matter how well-versed he was on a subject, he always let the other person do the talking first, then would ask them questions. Not only was he able to learn more, but it naturally made him entertain opinions contrary to his own, making him a much more open and humble person. If the person didn't know what they were talking about, the discussion didn't descend into an argument, they'd just slowly realize they were talking to someone much more informed, based solely on the questions he was asking, which in turn made them a lot more open to receiving an alternate opinion as well. There was this story that Andy Rooney told about a reporter from Stars and Stripes. He said the reporter would act as dumb as a rock when interviewing someone, and the person being interviewed would way over-explain the answers trying to help the reporter understand. The reporter was then able to write stories with greater details and better descriptions. Rooney said one time a pilot was interviewed by this reporter, and after the reporter left, the pilot told Rooney, "That man was so dumb I practically had to explain what an airplane was." Acting dumb is a great tactic when you need someone with a fragile ego to cooperate. When the cops show up at a house party, "Who lives here?" "I don't know." "Who broke this bottle in the street?" "Huh, no idea." "Where are the substances?" "Substances? What substances?" "Who drives the 2005 Camry out front?" "Beats me." I feel like the stupid act can be useful if you intentionally lower someone's expectations of you, then you have more options available to you later, depending on the situation, of course. Slightly related, isn't there an old proverb that's like, "It's better to keep your mouth shut and be thought a fool than to open it and remove all doubt"? I do this all the time. Mouth breathe, 1,000-yard stare. It really cuts down on people wanting me to do things for them. In many negotiations, the ignorant person will come out ahead. Stupid questions take time and can wear an adversary down. I've asked a car salesman, "How much do I save if I take out the sunroof because I don't want it?" Of course, he thought I was an idiot, but the next thing you know, the value of the sunroof is being deducted from the price. On a larger scale, the Russians have historically used this tactic when negotiating things like treaties. They've often pulled the language card. Their interpreters are not understanding what you're saying, and they need every line explained over and over. Stupidity wears people down, and they'll give you what you want just to get rid of you. When I was in college, I got a job at Sam's, and they told me I was in electronics because I knew computers. Later, my manager chewed me out for not zoning everywhere on my side of the store. Pretty soon, I lost all of my computer knowledge and became a drooling idiot that just put boxes on shelves. If you get a job in retail, any extra skill you have is just a liability without extra compensation, and you'll get used for it. If you're developing a relationship with someone and they start talking about a subject you're well versed in, just let them explain it, ask questions, and it'll naturally make your relationship progress. When you play with kids, you should let them show you things that you never knew before. I have a teacher who tells the story of his green herb-using friend from high school. He went to the same school I'm at now, which is a private Catholic school. They take substances pretty seriously and they expel students over them. So this buddy of mine, let's call him John, had started selling green herb, and the administration caught on. The dean of students at the time checked this guy's locker and found a ton of Mary J in it. He was called in the next day and told, "I know you have that stuff in your locker because I already checked. Just tell me the names of who you sold it to and I'll lighten the punishment." Well, he tells the dean a list of 3 or 4 guys that were all caught already and waiting outside. He says that's the list as he remembers it. It's not, he sold it to a lot of people. The dean sends him on his way and deals with the rest of the kids. Later that day, this one guy I know is called in because him and the dealer are friends. This guy is in a National Honors Society and works on the newspaper, 4.0 GPA, overall a good kid. The dean thought that he wouldn't lie and would rat out everyone who bought. The dean was wrong. This guy gets to the dean's office, walks in and sits down. The dean says, "Look, I busted John for possession of green herb and I know you have a—" My friend interrupts him. Whoa. John had green herb? Don't do this, Chad. No, you sure you got the right John? I'm sure. I just had no idea. I mean, we've been friends for years and he's never shown any interest in that stuff. Come on, Chad. No, can I just talk to him about this? I'm sure it's a misunderstanding. Chad, get the frick out of my office. So the moral of the story is to always deny or feign ignorance. It's a tactic that has worked for the narrator on many occasions. Living in a foreign land has gotten me out of trouble a number of times because I'm just a dumb foreigner. Then I listen to them talking about how dumb I am in my second language, and they move on. I thank my lucky stars and wipe off the cold sweat. When talking to people who like to argue just for the sake of it, no matter how well versed your views are, they'll find some stupid ways to crap all over them. Just shut up, pretend you don't know anything, and take the wind out of their sails. When your former employer is getting audited by the IRS and you're just a cashier at the car wash, copy Skylar White and play the dumb bimbo or medicated loser. Jury duty. They sent me home after asking me some questions. They asked me if I knew what something meant, and I stayed quiet for a couple of minutes until they explained it like I was 5, and I still told them I didn't understand. It's nearly always best to play dumb. I've come to find if you act like you don't know, most people will tell you what they know. If you do this long enough, you should acquire all the world's info. Seriously though, play dumb until you can't anymore, and if you're ever called on it, I usually just keep playing dumb and saying something like, "Oh, well, I wasn't sure if that was actually right or not. Now we know." When someone is obviously trying to exploit you, there's nothing more fun than pretending to be computer illiterate when you get one of those fake tech support calls. You know the ones, heavy Indian accent claiming to be from Microsoft, and see how long you can keep them on the line before they hang up. 1975 Cambodia. They executed anyone seen as being too intelligent. Anything IT related unless it's your job. I was the unofficial IT for my department until a woman brought in her laptop from home and left it on my desk to fix. I told her that was very inappropriate and that I can't take the liability of fixing her home computer. She slammed the door and cursed me out, and it was the only time I've yelled at a coworker, "You will never slam a door on me again." She said, "Get the frick back to your office and sit down. You will never curse at me again, and by God you'd better start acting your age at work, or at least act my age," I said as a 27-year-old reading the riot act to this 55-year-old woman. Our boss apologized on her behalf, but the woman didn't get reprimanded at all, and eventually I left for another project. Now I just pretend to be dumb. But magically, the printer and scanner and shared files and secure file transfers always work for me, so I think my coworkers are catching on. In eastern Ukraine, a friend and I got stopped by some thug on the street who was threatening us and implying that he was going to take our money. We pretended to not know Ukrainian. It ended up going fine. So I guess in that moment it was smart to pretend to be stupid. Similar thing happened to me on the streets of DC. Some guys came up to me and asked for my money and cell phone, but I'd just gotten out of a loud concert so I couldn't hear them at first. I just nodded and laughed and kept walking. They followed for a moment, but then I got to an area with more people and they melted away. People underestimate you, then you plan your moves without them even knowing that you could. When meeting your girlfriend's parents and play What's a Potato? When you're trying to catch someone in a lie. When you know all of the details but you just want to see them weave a tapestry of bullcrap. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. In a deposition, the less you say, the better. Also, I don't know and I don't remember are perfectly acceptable answers. You can play dumb in basic training for the armed forces. It saves you trouble, but it also saves you promotions. When you regularly find yourself in situations where you have to interact with stupid people for long stretches of time. I interact with uneducated blue-collar men in their 50s and 60s every day. Being too smart around them is a surefire way to marginalize yourself. When someone says, "I'm gonna shoot you if you're smart." When appearing too smart would trigger or offend people who you don't want to trigger or offend. It can be a friend or a cop pulling you over. When you're in a bar with a bunch of drunk, violent rednecks. I'm a recent graduate with a science degree and I'm applying for lots of jobs. I have my professional CV for career jobs, and then I have my slightly crappier, shorter CV for applying to dead-end jobs. My logic is that a company doesn't want to employ a recent science graduate in a customer service role if they know the employee will jump ship as soon as a career opportunity comes along, so I dumb myself down. Damn, the narrator wishes he'd made this move 2 years ago, was desperate and looking for literally anything, even minimum wage retail. Got no callbacks. But yeah, they'd probably wonder why someone with all of my adult job experience wouldn't leave them for something better as soon as the opportunity presented itself. And they'd be right. Play dumb when questioned by the Inquisition. Play dumb when you're a prisoner of war. See Doug Hegdahl. When you find a coworker's mistake at work, if you tell them that it's wrong, people automatically get defensive. If you say you don't understand why they did something the way they did, they'll find the mistake themselves. Also, if there's no mistake, it won't blow up in your face. Presumably, when you're arguing with a person who doesn't know much about the subject but just tries to look clever. Pretend to be dumb and ask them questions, from simpler to more difficult ones, and they'll eventually show their lack of knowledge, which you can exploit. That's what I heard works. At least some ancient Greek philosopher used this, I think. However, I'm too stupid to use it myself. When you happen upon a hostage situation, if you pretend to be mentally challenged, it's possible you'll be able to catch the dude off guard. Any time where you won't be paid for it, but you'll be expected to keep doing it once you show that you can. As a woman, I completely pretend to know nothing about technology or money when a salesman comes to the door. Sadly, my husband takes care of that and is out of town for a month is an easier way to get rid of them than I don't want it. When you encounter a know-it-all neckbeard kind of person, it's more entertaining to play dumb and listen to their wealth of knowledge, even if you know they're full of crap. It isn't worth starting an argument or hurting feelings, most of the time. Basic training. When the drill instructor says, "Anyone got a driver's license?" and all these hands go up, perfect. You, and you. Clean the johns. If you hear, "Does anyone have?" it's a trap. Be as stupid as possible and keep your mouth shut. Maybe not stupid, but ignorant. When my mum or fiancé shows me some video or asks me about something I've seen or already read about, it's usually better just to play along. Literally all the time, showing any capability at anything other than what's required of you is a great way to be exploited. I love when hard work is rewarded with more work. Everything's done. Go home early? Nope. Get an extra break? Nope. Extra pay? Don't be stupid. Promotion? Nope, you're too good at this work and we can't afford to lose that. Stay exactly where you are and have another shoveling of this lovely, delicious work. Maybe we'll fire someone to save some money and get you to do their job as well. Group work if you know exactly how to do everything that the group needs to do. When starting a new job, it varies from job to job, but generally speaking, it takes time to learn the ropes. As soon as you act like you know what's going on, people will stop helping you and begin to expect more of you. When I was younger, my tendency was to dive in headfirst with a gung-ho attitude. Oh, let me do it, I can handle it. I'm a bit more reserved these days. Unless I know that I can knock it out of the park, I don't step up. When salespeople come to the door or phone you, "Oh, I'm so sorry, my husband deals with all of this kind of thing. I don't understand. It's all so confusing. I don't have a husband." When negotiating for something. When the judge asks you why you stole all of the money. When someone wants help with their assignment and you know the right answers. When Pol Pot starts asking questions. You'd also do well to have good eyesight. If you pretend to be an idiot or ignorant, you can sometimes change the direction of the situation. For example, if a guy tells you to give him your money, say, "Sure." Take out your wallet, hand him a few bucks, and tell him "God bless," and then just walk away. When going through TSA in an airport. I'm autistic, though obviously high-functioning enough to be on the internet and to fly in an aircraft by myself, but airports in general make the autism a lot worse, and render me non-verbal, so I have to type everything on a phone and show it to people. I can't begin to tell you how many times I've just been waved through the TSA line without anything, and then given a direct ride to my gate or something like that. I guess it's not completely pretending because it is true to a point, but typing out, "I have autism, please be patient" on a phone and sticking it in a TSA agent's face seems to translate to, "I'm mentally challenged and no possible threat. Let me pass without any security measures." So the narrator was of two minds about putting this piece of advice on the internet, but it is interesting and it does pertain to the topic, so any potential villains, please don't do this. Thank you. When you're a woman and a guy likes you and is going to buy you something. All the time, to be honest. Any hearsay or opinions or money matters between multiple family members. Play dumb and walk away. In prison or among criminals, not a good idea to stand out being seen as overly intellectual. When you want someone to think they're smarter than you. I shamelessly played dumb as a white girl who found myself in a redneck bar. When the locals started getting rowdy and saying stupid crap, I got the frick out as quickly, gracefully, and low-key as I could before I outed myself as having a brain. When some wise guy from Jersey asks you what you saw as he lets you out of the trunk. George W. Bush did it for 8 years and became president off that facade. Pretty darn smart of him because it worked. People think he's legitimately stupid. When your country's despot leader is hunting down intellectuals. When you work for a government entity, being proactive here just gets you in trouble. Whenever traveling overseas and you get into trouble. As an American, I often played the "I'm an ignorant American, I didn't know I needed a ticket to ride the train." I got out of so many fines this way. Don't judge me, I was in school and I had very little money. When third world police are trying to shake you down for no reason. When you got caught doing something you're not supposed to, it's easier to say, "Sorry, I didn't know," than "I knew it was wrong, but I did it anyway." When smart people are getting purged. I act stupid by default. No point in showing your cards, right? People expect less of you. They aren't intimidated by you and therefore they can feel more open with you. At a poker table, I sat down being the only female in the room and pretended not to know a few things. It was digital poker where you play and bet against others, but the dealer is just the computer. Asked, "How do I see my cards?" You had to cup your hands over them on the table and had trouble setting up the login. Everyone saw me as easy prey. I made $550 that day. Your first day in prison. Mouth shut, ears, eyes wide open. It's almost always smart to pretend to be stupid. Smart people are almost universally detested. If you really are smart, you don't want to let the other monkeys catch wind of it until you have an escape plan. When a cute girl asks about your educational background. My husband knows how to fix the cars, so I see no point in me retaining that knowledge. I know the basics in case something happens and I'm alone, but I'll never let him know that, and I'll never want to take a lesson from him again. When you're being interrogated by the police, until you're represented by a lawyer, say nothing. Remain completely mute and ignorant of any information they try to pry out of you, save your name and the desire for representation. When you realize you're by far the smartest in a group of people. When the IRS audits your tax return and asks if you realized that the deductions you listed were not legitimate. Counting cards in a casino. When a child tells you all about something you already know. Be engaged, show them that you're listening, encourage them when they falter. Plus, sometimes it's just refreshing to see things with a child's eyes. If you can't make time then and there, always be willing to revisit. When your joke about not knowing what a potato is goes wrong. When someone makes an overtly racist, sexist, or homophobic joke or comment, act like you just don't get it and get them to explain it over and over, highlighting their own bigotry and stupidity. When you're locked in a room with 5 other people and the last one alive that solves a puzzle gets to go free. You want everyone to want you to be the last one they have to go up against to live. How are white people stereotyped in predominantly non-white cultures? My wife from Cameroon was very surprised when she first saw white people that were poor. She didn't think it was possible. However, once I went to visit a market and I heard a guy shout, "White people are rich, but not this one. This white guy is poor." That was probably a clever way to get my attention to sell me something. Maybe as a consequence of being thought of as rich, white people are very important or prestigious. Once we met a cousin of my wife who was bragging that her husband had several cars. My wife replied, "Yeah, well, my husband is white." In Cameroon, most people believe in sorcery. One guy who was apparently knowledgeable about these kinds of things told me sorcery doesn't work on white people. +10 magic defense. Frick yes, hidden racial bonuses for the win. In the mountains of Peru, it's an urban legend of sorts that white people will steal children. So much so that when I'm around a misbehaving child, the mother almost always threatens the child by saying that the gringo, me, will take you away. That's kind of funny. As a white, I hold the stereotype that many South Americans would kidnap me and either sell me for ransom or as part of a substance cartel plot. Back in high school, we had 60% foreigners, Korean or Taiwanese mostly. The funniest thing I've ever been called was a round-eyed burger muncher. The kid was serious too. When I lived in the Middle East, I was told by an Arab friend that she always thought that white people, mainly the women, were very loose with their bedroom morals, and stuck up. It explained a lot of the not-so-nice things some of my classmates said about or to me before they got to know me. "You're not loose and stuck up like the rest of us? I'm so confused." "My grandfather was killed by being a stuck-up loose woman, you insensitive clod." "Oh, that's probably how I'm gonna go too." We'll just mud wrestle our confusion away, as is the white custom. A lot of my Middle Eastern white friends think that white people only ever eat turkey and mashed potatoes, or meatloaf. Well, to be fair, there are definitely certain gym-goers who would exclusively eat turkey if they could. There are also some Caucasian replies to this statement. "That's ridiculous. We only eat bacon cheeseburgers and fries, of course." "I nominate the milkshake as the official white person drink." I lived in a predominantly Hispanic area, and one thing that was always associated with white people was money. You were a rich white kid no matter how much money your parents had. No matter where you lived or how poor you were a rich white kid. "Hey man, look at Richie rich white boy over there, strutting around the Walmart car park, begging for change like he owns the frickin' place. Rich jackass." Among Dominicans, white people are considered rich and generally friendly. We also think that no crime occurs around white people. It's considered highly respectable for a Dominican woman to have a white man, even if he is a low-life substance dealer. I can honestly say that most Dominican mothers would rather have their daughter date a white substance addict, garbage man, than a rich black doctor. White people are considered so above everyone else in our society. The funny thing is that to outsiders, Dominicans are black. Dominican women in the US want to be as far away from black culture as possible. They think they're white, basically. It's quite funny. When I went to the Dominican in October, they treated us like frickin' royalty. It was ridiculous. Our busboy told me he hated black people, which confused me. I assumed he was talking about Haitians. And all of the women wanted kisses from my blonde-haired, blue-eyed kid. They'd all call him over with Nino Blanco and ask for kisses on the cheek. My wife said, "Well, at least we know he'll never have a problem with the ladies in the Dominican." In Zimbabwe, white people are thought to have no knees. This is due to them wearing long trousers and dresses all the times, apparently. It's also, apparently, extremely funny to them. This is extremely funny. A real knee slapper, or a long leg slapper as my white brothers would call it. My brother's in jail for being a knee slapper. It's classed as racially aggravated assault. I've been to Liberia a couple of times, and I've picked up that a lot of the people think that the white people are rather ignorant of how the world works. They're very nice and helpful, but they make you feel like a child sometimes. Most of the time you have to rely on actual children to figure out what the heck is going on. In all fairness, perhaps you should have let them watch out for you, even if it makes you feel like a child, given that you're visiting fricking Liberia. Quite. The kids who I met there are more mature than a lot of my grown peers in the US. That said, they will kick your skinny white butt in kickball. Holy balls are they good. Stereotypical white statement. I'll use my credit card.
Oh, and do you have any non-dairy creamer?
I used to live in South Korea, and according to my friend, there's a belief amongst a few Asians that white people are less evolved because they have more hair.
I'm a balding white male. Am I evolving? Will I get superpowers?
My chemistry teacher always said, the more hair I lose, the more head I get.
That's actually a brilliant joke. Most kids won't realize the dirtiness of it until they're long gone. Or I need to get my mind out of the gutter.
I've lived in Tokyo most of my adult life. There's a stereotype hierarchy that goes from foreigner, that's the most important, then to the subsets of white, automatically considered a loudmouthed American who only speaks English, or black, automatically considered a hip-hop gangster who only speaks parody MTV English, or Asian. Yes, that's a stereotype in Japan. You'll be considered a dirty, poor Asian. I'm a musician, and unfortunately my appearance means I fall into a further subset. Dangerous foreigner, probably a drug dealer. Because in Japan, everyone assumes most crime is by foreigners. Actually, crime by foreigners is proportionately much lower. So I get stopped by police all the time. I should add, just as being a black guy in a nice suit getting a coffee in Manhattan is a very different experience from being black with sagging pants and walking into a truck stop in Alabama, so Japan has a wide range of contexts which will affect your treatment here. My friend from Vietnam always talks about white people being crazy. He'd say if a black or Asian guy wants to kill you, he'll just shoot you. But if a white person wants you dead, he will eat you and commit the unspeakable act on your family.
Well, to be fair, in Vietnam, it's not hard to see where this one came from.
White people dance with their elbows instead of their hips.
False. I do not dance at all. In your face.
Then you ain't no friend of mine. White guy here, but when living near the border, I had 3 different Mexican guy friends tell me on 3 separate occasions that white women are freaks, i.e. promiscuous and adventurous to the point of intimidating. Apparently, I've been hanging around the wrong white women.
Nah, you just haven't been hanging around enough Latina women. White women are freaks in comparison, going by general cultural tendencies.
Oh, I know, the Mexican girls had flirting perfected beyond all comprehension, but from what I could tell, that's as far as it goes. See Pierce Brosnan's quote as Julian in The Matador. After flirting with some Mexican schoolgirls, he says, "I hate these Catholic countries. It's all blushy and no..." redacted by the narrator of this video. Where I grew up, the word for white man was mzungu. Came from the word kuzunguka. It means to walk around in circles. In my opinion, this is a good basis for what they thought of white people. They sell shirts with Mzungu written on them in Kenya, presumably to tourists. My white father bought one because he thought it was humorous to have a shirt with "white guy" written on it. Did you grow up in Zambia? I was there this past summer, and wherever I went, people would point and yell Mzungu.
Note to self, if ever in Africa and people yell Mzungu, start walking around in circles and observe reaction.
I have one of those shirts. I bought it in Uganda and it says, "My name is not Mzungu." I heard that word so many times in those 2 weeks that when I finally saw the shirt, I just laughed and threw copious amounts of money at the lady. They knew how to work the tourists, haha. I mean, it sounds like it would get you laughed at in the country for wearing it. But if you don't mind, great. Also, I hope you wore it back home just to confuse people. In Western China, where seeing a white person is so rare that people would stop dead when they saw me, stare, and often pull out a camera to snap some pictures of or with me, white people are considered beautiful, fashionable, sometimes ignorant, and a little sneaky. They assume we all speak English. Most people assume that I was British, I'm American, because I'm skinny. In fact, I had people ask me, after finding out that I'm from the US, why are you not fat? I didn't talk a lot of politics with everyone, kind of a touchy subject in China, but I talked about it with the family I was living with. They thought that Americans were warmongers. They thought it has been too long since we had a real war on our soil and we've forgotten what it's like. We go into war to try and help people, but their opinion is that war helps no one. Some Koreans jokingly think that a lot of white American people greet each other with, "Yo, what's up, man?" with the hand grab chest bump. Every male I know under age 22 does this regardless of race.
Male under the age of 22 here, hand grab chest bump overcomes all barriers.
As a Chinese person who mainly grew up in the United States, I don't know much about how whites are stereotyped in China, but my parents do. Essentially, in China, people have a love-hate relationship with white people, wanting to be like whites, which is mainly just Westerner. They want to be this way because of the power and status it represents, but at the same time are resentful of that power and status. By the way, in Cantonese, a slang term for blacks literally translates to fermented soybean, because of the black color of fermented soybeans. People will fall head over heels around a white person to the point where they'll just hire random white people to attend important parties or become spokespeople for their products. Contrast that with the disdain that they have for Chinese that come from America. My mum once said that if you, as a Chinese American, ever want to go back to China, that you'll get better waiter service if you bring along a white friend wearing a business suit. Sad, but true. There was an Economist article a while ago that talked about how Chinese were crisscrossing Europe to buy a lot of Western goods because it was a symbol of status in society that you could afford to buy those things. Many Chinese, likely due to a lack of education and exposure, are what I'd like to call extreme passive racists. This means that they have very stereotypical views of other ethnic groups, but they don't plan on taking action on those beliefs anytime soon. I'm sure it's like this for many other cultures as well.
So you're saying that if I moved to China and bought all my suits, I could do well for myself without a full-time job? I'd schmooze and eat for a living if that was an option.
Yes, in fact, there's a lot of people whose full-time job it is simply to be white and wear a business suit as part of a group of people in China. Now we know what Barney Stinson's job is.
Ha! Please.
You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I went to Nepal last year and apparently they believe white people never work. I was helping build playground equipment and crowds of people would show up to watch. They would gawk for hours. It weirded me out and this is what I was told when I asked.
When I was in Nepal, some kids bathing in the local river yelled, "You're American, you eat cats." I thought it was hilarious.
My Asian friend told me that all of her friends always felt that the white people they'd encountered smelt like milk, all the time.
I've heard this too, and it makes sense. People tend to give off odors based on their diets. Only white people drink so much milk and cheese. Most of the rest of the world is lactose intolerant.
Washichu, he who takes the best meat for himself. I'm a white guy who lived on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation for a few months. I always thought that Washichu was the only slur I've ever been called that actually bothered me. A young Oglala told me it means takers of the fat, for white people killing buffalo and only taking the fat. The best part. We had a little joke or pun at meals. Who took the last piece of fry bread? Washichu? Other stereotypes held by some Oglala were that we're all incredibly hairy, which we pretty much are compared to most Native Americans, and that we're all uncircumcised. I still don't really understand the uncircumcised thing, but I saw that a lot in graffiti. In Gambia, we think you're really nice. Seriously. I live in Bangkok, and here, white people are seen as rich, culturally disrespectful, and for the men, specifically, randy deviants. Also completely unable to eat spicy food. There's a few stereotypes I grew up hearing about in an immigrant mixed race, South Asian and African, family in the West. These mostly seem to be about middle-class white people. Note, I'm simply reporting these, I don't agree with them. I'm writing them as if my grandparents are saying them. For example, White people don't love their kids as much because they kick them out when they're 18 and don't support them after that. Also, white people are not as educationally driven when it comes to their children. For example, they won't work long hours in a multitude of jobs and save pennies to send them to the best schools and hire extra tutors and focus on their kids winning maths championships and stuff. The exception to this is Jewish people who are very admirable. White kids, in turn, put their parents in nursing homes as soon as they're able, which is unacceptable. White people are all into artsy-fartsy things like liberal arts and art school and painting that don't get you anywhere. They don't realize that the only worthwhile paths are medicine, law, engineering, pharmacy, sciences, accountancy, and business. White people eat really bland food, like they eat things like chicken, cooked only in salt and pepper, and carrots in strange creamy sauces. White people like to go to India, Africa, etc. to discover themselves, which is hilarious because then they start wearing saris and things and thinking that if you use curry powder, you've made a curry, and attributing erroneous spiritual wisdom to ethnic people. White people are not as clean. For example, white people will put on clean clothes on an unbathed body in the morning, and they only use toilet paper in the bathroom, as in they only use toilet paper and not water to clean their butts. Also, they wear shoes in the house and own a lot of cats which walk on their kitchen benches. White people are more random about doing the deed, specifically white women. If you take them to a fancy restaurant and give them a rose and chat about poetry, they will sleep with you. Disturbingly, this is according to my grandfather. That's apparently all it takes. Some white people smoke green herb with their kids. White people drink a lot, especially white women who often inexplicably consume wine alone. White people are obsessed with wine. Oh, and one more. White people are too gentle with their kids and don't discipline them properly. See also Russell Peters. Wow, some of these, I won't say white people, but they're accurate to Western culture. Wine, for instance. The first one is funny because in the States at least, the best thing you can do for your kid is make sure they're independent. Americans thrive on the idea of independence. Funny that, to other people, that means you love them less. Out here, we'd find someone weird for living too long with their parents, psychologically weak and codependent. Well, that last one was a real bundle of opinions. Gotta say, this whole thread has been really educational. And no, I won't be doing the accents for some of these cultures, for hopefully very obvious reasons. The stereotype of whites amongst South Asians is that white people can't manage their finances properly, and that they are, in a selfish sense, self-concerned rather than being considerate about others. In that parents kick out kids at 18, and kids throw their parents into old homes, all because they're self-concerned and only care about their own lives. Also, that they can't plan for the future, part of why they're poor with finances. Also, white people, particularly Americans, are scared of everything. Seatbelts, pollution, terror attacks, etc. And by that I mean to an unhealthy level of scared of stuff in their minds. That's generally the stereotype anyway. I've later updated this to address people rightfully bringing up my calling Asians inconsiderate. Keep in mind, the thing of most importance to South Asians is family, and it's family and social circles that they feel deserve the most attention. Given the highly populated natures of these countries and the laissez-faire styled capitalism society, one quickly realizes that being considerate to everybody is shooting yourself in the foot, unless everybody else is also considerate, which is rare. Thus, this consideration is limited to your family and friends. It's not as extreme in South Asia, in that they're willing to help a random stranger if it isn't detrimental to them, but the further extreme in an even more populous country such as China can be seen with the toddler and van accident. So I'm just giving that perspective where they're perplexed by why white people don't have any consideration of the ones they love, family. And you dolts, I don't mean that whites are literally afraid of seatbelts, rather the wearing of seatbelts from fear. I'm also South Asian, and I think that most of the stereotypes I've heard come from the fact that South Asians, and most Asians for that matter, are very collectivist, while America is becoming more and more individualistic. Therefore, people assume Americans don't care for anyone but themselves and have no respect for family. As someone mentioned, putting your parents in an old folks' home rather than caring for them personally. And have no culture as a byproduct of not having any traditions or community. Interestingly enough, I know many people in my parents' generation who emigrated to the US, who abhor the idea of their children, in my generation, taking care of them in their old age. They like the idea of being independent and have no desire to do the work that generally goes along with staying with your kids, like looking after your grandchildren all day. As a Caucasian who lived in China and other parts of Asia for some years, I'm generalizing a couple of stereotypes I came across. Not everybody has them, of course. White people are all from the US. I'm not, by the way, and can all speak English. White people all have money. White people have more beautiful skin and eyes. White people who marry a local and have a kid will have a very smart child, because it's mixed. White people cannot understand Chinese, so it's fine to talk about them openly even when they're 1 meter away, never mind if they understand every word. Many white people have a more open attitude towards relationships. White people can be more rude, but that's mostly okay because they don't know better. As a white in China, I've pretty much never encountered hatred or open attacks. The racism, for better or worse, slightly favors white, which I suppose has to do with the average income of foreigners there. Chinese have a lot of whitening products advertised, which I suppose may have to do with certain lower status jobs like field workers having more exposure to sun. Hence, they're darker. However, my views are filtered from the racism I as a white encountered. In other words, there may be a lot of stereotypes I've never heard of because nobody told me, or because of the language barrier. I speak a bit, but wouldn't understand everything. All in all, Chinese were incredibly open and friendly, including being openly outspoken about race. Note that the stereotypes some Westerners I talked to had about Chinese were much more brutal than this. They're like ants, uncreative, can't be trusted, etc. were some of the bad racist highlights I encountered. Also note that the stereotypes of Chinese in relation to blacks are worse too. Talking about race, I've asked a couple of Chinese, what would your parents say if you dated a black guy? And the answer was often that the parents would be strictly against this. As a final note, let's repeat. Above stereotypes are not held by all Chinese. Maybe not even the majority. Maybe they're only a minority. They're just some vocal patterns that I ran into. In my family, I was always told by my parents that white people were lazy, never put value on education, and had no culture of their own. It's obviously not my own opinion. Chinese here. My parents think that white people are all divorced. I'm surprised this hasn't already come up. When I lived in the Bay Area in San Francisco for about half a year, any of my friends that were Chinese or Korean thought that all white people never took their shoes off. I was constantly reminded to take my shoes off when entering their houses because they thought we all just walk around the house dragging dirt everywhere. Chinese in China view white people with fascination and curiosity, like they're aliens from the planet Caucasoid. They generally don't have strong negative opinions of white people. However, Chinese expatriates living in the Western world think most white people are extremely selfish and completely tactless. Many are also seen as outwardly polite but inwardly racist to some degree. Some, not all white people, are seen as excessively aggressive and have very incurable alpha male syndrome. They seem to be poor problem solvers, only able to plan 1 or 2 steps ahead. They don't like to think unless they have to. They can be very attractive but age very quickly and seem to gain weight easily, especially the women. They're thin-skinned. And in negotiations, dealing with them bluntly and directly is the preferred approach over diplomatic and passive-aggressive methods. Also, never let white people borrow anything for very long, because after a while, they'll consider it theirs and won't return it. I lived in South America for 9 years, and the predominant stereotype is that white people are rich, entitled, and immoral. White women are seen as easy. The former comes from nearly a century of abuse from the US government and corporations, particularly the latter. US tourists most certainly do not help alleviate this. The latter comes from adult flicks. As a white guy, I ran into a lot of prejudice until people realized I was far more South American than American culturally and spoke perfect Spanish. These feelings mostly manifested in me getting charged roughly 10 times the cost a local would whenever I went anywhere or bought something. Until I began to haggle in Spanish and they realized they'd made a mistake in judging me. I wanted to offer my own experiences and noticed most of the comments up top refer to Asian stereotypes. What names of people you've met made you wonder what their parents were thinking? Boss's friend named their kid Monster Galileo followed by their last name. The nurse tried to talk them out of it. They called in child services to talk them out of it. The people insisted. Kid goes by Galileo. Honestly, I kind of like the sound of it for an adult or a performer's name, but being a kid named Monster has to be rough in school. I feel like you'd be cool as heck in elementary school if you were named Monster. Middle school would be rough, but hopefully by that time you're coasting on the popularity from elementary and just carry the awesomeness forward. It really depends on your personality. If you end up being a shy kid or do anything embarrassing, that name would be brutal to have. If you're popular or edgy, then it's an awesome name. My boyfriend's grandmother wanted to name her daughter Sunshine. The midwife said that wasn't allowed because it wasn't a real name, and his grandmother had no other baby backup names. So a few minutes later, when she heard someone down the hall screaming, "Tina," she named her daughter Tina because she couldn't think of anything else on the spot. I once met a dude named Lovey. It was a family name. I think it was especially cute because he was such a big, tough guy.
There's a male New Zealand weightlifter named Precious.
My boyfriend was nearly called Egbert, but predominantly Egg for short. I'm glad they decided against it.
I knew a guy named Engbert. I don't know why his parents would call him that because Eng means scary in our language. He was kind of a bully though, so I guess it fits.
I worked at a registrar for a while, and among the birth certificates I got, some of the standouts I saw were Killer, Syphilis, and Sweet Prayer Sunrise. This last one was a boy.
Any idea why someone would want to name their kid Syphilis?
The father gave her both at the same time?
The parents probably heard it somewhere, didn't know what it meant, but liked the ring of it.
My dad knew a girl in school named Bimbo. Bimbo brand bread is one of, if not the largest manufacturer of bread products on the planet. Except it never really took off in America because we don't pronounce Bimbo like the Mexican manufacturer does. They pronounce it Bimbo, not Bimbo. As much as that might explain where the word came from, I can't imagine that being named after a brand of bread would have been much more preferable to the girl. I guess at least the pronunciation might throw people off. Before I was born, my dad wanted to name me Sky, but he thought that replacing the Y with an I would be cute. Thank goodness my mum isn't stupid, or I might have been named Ski. I knew a woman who named her daughter Sunny with an I. White, new age sort of woman. I don't think she realized it, ever. Was that girl always fighting with her sister, Shia? My classmate's mother was a maternity nurse, and she has a couple who wanted to name their son Colin, but wanted to give him a unique spelling for it. I don't understand why parents do this. It doesn't make a boring name more interesting at all. All it does is set your child up for lifelong inconvenience. They spelled it out for her to put on the birth certificate. Colon. They tried to name their son colon, as in the organ attached to your butt. When my classmate's mother explained this to them, they were painfully embarrassed and asked her to write it down with the normal spelling instead. I don't think they'll ever live it down. I went to school with a colon as well. It was not great for him.
Could you pass the salt? Eventually?
Conversely, I went to high school with a kid named Colin, and our physics teacher constantly pronounced it colon. Like, how many times does he have to correct you, lady? In France, there used to be a list of names that you had to choose from, mostly based on that day's name, saint, and 3 to 4 others, which is why there were so many Jean, Marc, Louise, Philippes, Marys, Annes, Valeries, etc. in France. Now it's free choice, but anyone can ask a judge to cancel a name choice and force the parents to suggest one the judge finds acceptable. So no names like Coca-Cola, Xerox, substance names, butthole, Nutella, fruit, devil, blue, murder. Plus the rejected name gets added to a banned list to streamline the rejection in the future. In Denmark, we still have an approved list of names. You can apply for a name to be added, but other than that, you choose from the very long list. Portugal also has a list of names. It's included multiple spellings of the same name. Eric, and Eric with a K are all allowed, though Eric's not really a Portuguese name. And names that aren't just from the Portuguese language. I think they are there so that children of third-generation immigrants can have names from their cultures. However, if at least one of the parents isn't Portuguese, you're allowed to name your child anything that's not offensive. My brother talked my mother out of naming me Mulan because he had a major crush on her and didn't think a sack of potatoes like me deserved to be given her name. I tried to tell someone not to name their kid Tarmac. They learned the word from NASCAR.
They could have just named him Jimmy, Jeff, or Dale.
Not a nurse, but as a med student, a patient wanted to name her child Mudpiles. The nurses silently protested and waited a few days. Mum changed her mind.
Mudpiles, I love it. God, what kind of a kid Mudpiles might have been?
The S at the end really makes it. I wish the mom hadn't changed her mind. I would support baby Mudpiles all the way. I mean, maybe the mom was also a med student, just considering that Mudpiles is a pretty common acronym that med students find helpful.
My ex-husband didn't think it was fair that girls could be named Grace or Hope, etc., and seriously suggested Pestilence, War, or Plague for a boy. His choice for a girl was Tangerine. Fortunately, we never had any children. I'm a Grace, still waiting to meet the pestilence of my dreams. The thought of meeting someone and then being like, "This is my son Plague and my daughter Tangerine," is killing me. Oh my god. Another story where I can bring up Discworld characters. Allow me to introduce Hope, Charity, Chastity, and Prudence Carter, and their brothers Animal Lover, Anger, Deviousness, Covetousness, Jealousy, and Catastrophe. You can't just leave them hanging with that small reference. The Carter parents were a quiet and respectable Lancre family who got into a bit of a mix-up when it came to naming their children. First, they had 4 daughters who were christened Hope, Chastity, Prudence, and Charity, because naming girls after virtues is an ancient and unremarkable tradition. Then their first son was born, and out of some misplaced idea about how this naming business was done, he was called Anger Carter, followed later by Jealousy Carter, Animal Lover Carter, and Covetousness Carter. Chastity was enjoying life as a lady of negotiable affection in Ankh-Morpork, Prudence had 13 children, and Charity expected to get a dollar's change out of 75 pence, whereas the boys had grown into amiable, well-tempered men, and Bestiality Carter was, for example, very kind to animals. My uncle wanted to name his daughter Raider God. I'm glad they settled on Jada. I work in a music store that offers lessons and rents instruments. We have a list of the oddest child names. Jamuary, Quest with a W, Sixte, Shebra, Battle, and Shy Ann are just a few on there. The best one was AmITheA. When speaking with the grandmother, she said that the mum wanted to name her Olivia, but the father hated the name. The dad saw a bottle of Aleve on the counter, so he and the mother compromised and came up with AmITheA. Haha, Shebra, followed by her brother, Hebra. Hijockstrap? As much as I want to meet someone called Hijockstrap, I imagine that Shebra may have a different culture behind its origin than the others. My dad loves Stevie Nicks and wanted to name all of us Rhiannon, but my mum wouldn't let him. So my oldest sister's name ended up being Stevie Nicole, but now some people always assume she's a guy when they see the name Stevie. Rhiannon is a popular name in Wales. It wouldn't seem unusual here. My sister's name is Rhiannon, but my mom was always scared people would call her Rhea for short, so she only called my sister by her middle name. Kind of funny to type that out. She loved Fleetwood Mac but was too worried to fully commit to the name Rhiannon. I once had a student named Linoleum. Some midwife really dropped the ball on that one. My brother wanted to name our soon-to-be younger brother Corn Peas, and our parents almost went with it, because they felt bad about asking for his input and then rejecting it. Fortunately, they got over that and passed on the name. Cornelius Pearson Smith. Corn Peas for short. Cornelius grew up with a perpetually broken nose thanks to his name. And here my mum was talked out of naming me Violet. Sounds like an old lady, they said. Aw, but Violet is such a cool name. I know. Instead, I got one of the most common names of the 80s. When I went to college, I lived in a hallway where there were literally 6 of us. My roommate had the same first name as well. I do like my name because it sounds good with my last name, but I have only once met a Violet in 37 years, and she's my friend's niece. I'm a teacher. There are certain names that each teacher avoids because we've had a student, or 7 with that name, who were difficult in some way or another. One year, there were 4 Dylans in the same cohort, and they were all hell on wheels. One of the teachers at that grade level had a baby with his wife that spring, and she named the kid Dylan. The rest of us were like, "Didn't you vehemently veto that?" He just shrugged and said it was important to her, and he wasn't the superstitious type. Flash forward a few years, and I saw a toddler tearing through the salad bar at the grocery store, spilling things, moving spoons from one container to another, reaching in it with his hands. It was Dylan. I haven't ever met a Brian, Brandon, or Braden that wasn't a terrible brat. My late, unlamented brother-in-law was Brian, pain in the butt to be very mild, substance addict, tried to kidnap my child twice, got married on my husband's birthday, etc. Brandon down the street would come into our yard and steal from my kids and harass my cats. I've always found that any boy named Angel was poorly behaved. This didn't extend to girls, though. Angela, Angelina, and Angelica, they were fine. Boys named Angel are always the worst behaved. Also, Anthony, Bodie, Kevin, Travis, Vincent, and Victor. My rule in general, anything with a V in it will probably be a pain in the neck. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below.
And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I had a coworker named Trina. When she was pregnant, she told me that she and her husband had decided to name the baby Latrine. I had to explain to her that she was naming the poor baby after the hole in the ground that soldiers crap into. She was horrified and changed it to Katrina. 2 days after the kid was born, Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans. I hate to wonder what would have happened to New Orleans if she did name her Latrine.
That would have been quite the crap storm.
I have a false leg. My parents had to be talked out of calling me Peggy by the midwife. Oh, you probably could have taken them to court if they called you that. Oh, Peggy Sue.
You could sue for a pretty penny, Peggy.
My mother, who has an odd, to say the least, sense of humor, wanted to name the baby brother Ichabod Rusty. Our surname is Ford. She was determined to call him Itchy Rusty Ford. Tickled herself crapless through the pregnancy. And look, it was funny, I was 12, but everyone thought she was just being her usual goofy self. Apparently, she got attached to it, and at some point Dad just said, "Frick no, we're not naming the baby that." They settled on something much more appropriate. Although these days, I think the little crap might have been better named Itchy Rusty in my opinion. Similarly, our surname is something that can basically mean male member in my language. My dad wanted to name me Elwood if I was a boy. My mum was like, "Woody Wang? No way!" And my dad legitimately saw no issue with that. His second choice was to name me after his father, Harry. Good thing I'm a girl. Not a midwife, but lived with the student midwife when I was a student. The first set of twins she delivered got called Red and Blue. When I worked in a boring admin job dealing with applications from members of the public, I came across Jessica Rabbit. Saw her passport and everything. I just hope that she chose that later in life rather than her parents landing her with it. The worst ones I saw in that job were combinations made by women getting married and taking their husband's surnames, so can't really be blamed on the parents. I took my husband's surname so my initials would no longer be JCB, which is a tractor brand in the UK. My dad knew when naming me and thought it was hilarious. I'm getting married this year, so my initials will soon be MEH. Of all things in life, I can easily say I didn't see that coming.
Hang in there, meh. My wife used to have the initials HOT, which she is, but now is HOR, which she's not so thrilled about. I was originally supposed to be Lex, like Lex Luthor. My dad talked my mum into naming me Alexander and my nickname be Lex, but they just called me Alex.
I always assumed Lex Luthor's full name was Alexander.
Oh, it is. I have a son named Alexander who goes by Lex. It's a perfect name for him, even though he's a very kind and compassionate kid.
As a family medicine resident, I personally delivered 2 different girls named Khaleesi. This was around 2016, well before Season 8. I imagine there might be some buyer's remorse on the parents' part at this point. Yep, I've often wondered about the thousands of children who were called Daenerys or Khaleesi and how they reacted after the Mother of Dragons went full crazy murderer fascist. And I'm just going to say I fricking called it about how that was going to go down. Working as an ERT on overnights, I got called to an OB to help out a lot. One name will always stick with me because of how unfortunate it is for the kid and how ridiculous everything about it was. The mum was deep into crystal and other substance use, and she told us she wanted him named Zion. We were like, "Oh, cool, no problem." So we asked her to fill out the paperwork of everything for us to submit, and put in the chart, and she wrote down Vazion. She looked us dead in the ears and said the V is silent. She also gave him 5 middle names because she didn't know which one was the father, so he got them all.
Should have named that kid Pokemon. Kids caught all the middle names.
I'm neither of these, but I had a classmate in university whose name was Mega Nathan. To date, I don't know why Nathan failed to suffice. When I first read that name, I thought it would be pronounced similar to Afghanistan, Meganathan. On second look, I'm now wondering whether it's actually pronounced Mega Nathan and struggling to decide which is worse.
My dad wanted to name me Snövit, the Swedish name for Snow White, but in the end my parents named me something else. Had my younger brother been a girl, he had been named Tornrosa, meaning Thorn Rose, which is the Swedish name on Sleeping Beauty. Never did get to the bottom of what my dad's obsession with princesses was all about.
My mum is a public school librarian, and the cringiest name she's encountered so far is a girl named Lesme, pronounced like Leslie but with an M. I also have an acquaintance with the last name Forrest, whose father was eventually talked out of naming her Rain. Back in 2000 to 2004, I worked in a hospital doing admin, and an old battle axe of a senior midwife stomped over with this angry-looking pregnant teenager in tow. "Varvara!" Old battle axe roared. "Varvara! Open up that internet-y thing on your computer." Old battle axe didn't know computers, but she was well scary, so I agreed, and opened up the internet-y thing. "Show this ridiculous child the first thing that appears when you type in the word Chanterelle." The angry, pregnant teenager whined about how it was a pretty name and loads of girls were naming their little girl it, and then she went stone-dead silent when she saw picture after picture of nasty sulfur-yellow mushrooms sprouting out of muddy forest floors. "Told you, it's a frickin' fungus!" Old battle axe roared and stamped off to be terrifying and sensible to other pregnant teenagers, leaving me with the angry one. Turned out that the name she'd actually been thinking of was Chardonnay, which is both the name of a very expensive wine and the name of a character in a UK soap opera called Footballers' Wives, which is about as classy as it sounds. The baby got that as a middle name later on, which was fine. The first name was Sophie or something along those lines. That's awesome. The midwife probably acted that way so she could stop future generations from being born with names like Old Battle Axe, although I bet with a name like that she got picked first in sports. All the senior midwives at my hospital had names like that. Old Battle Axe and Iron Lil were the two I remember most vividly. They'd been there since the place was built and were older than God and had absolutely no time for bullcrap. They kept the place impeccable and everyone up to and including the head of the NHS were frightened of them. I once saw Iron Lil take down a drunk and bullying boyfriend with a flying rugby tackle outside of the water birthing room. It was great. I would like to hear more stories about Iron Lil and Old Battle Axe, please.
That sounds incredible. I want to hear all of your stories about these ladies. What awesome lives.
My dad legitimately told my mum that my sister was to be either Jackie Ann after his ex or Lisa Marie after Elvis's daughter. I'm amazed that I was conceived after that. My sister is Lisa. Haha. I wanted to name my daughter Daisy, as it's always been my favorite. Even my husband loved the idea. My whole family said it was a dog's name and they wouldn't let it go, so I didn't name her Daisy. And here I am Pupatai Arevu Danambi, Kalia Perumal.
Oh, hello, fellow South Indian person.
I was almost named Cinderelle. I have no idea what my dad was smoking at the time.
My coworker went to school with a girl named Fallopia. I feel sorry for her, especially when she takes biology classes and they have to talk about fallopian tubes.
I know a teacher who has an elementary-age student with an African name that unfortunately does not translate well into North American English. The kid's name is Akok Ring. And yes, I wish I was kidding. In my high school, there was a kid whose name sounded like the F word when pronounced in English. I kid you not, all of the teachers called him Lucky instead. I don't know the details because he was an upperclassman and I didn't know him personally. My mum wanted to name me Kirby, after her vacuum. Thankfully, my dad talked her out of it.
I currently work with someone whose name is Immunique. I don't think any midwives or nurses were involved with the naming.
I met a child called Immunique once. She was not the only one in her class of first graders named that. You could tell it already annoyed her as she had to spell it out to me and the other adults there. Well, color me surprised that there was more than one child with that name in a single educational institution. Does this come from a TV show or something? Is it the Khaleesi of the 1980s?
My mom had to talk my dad out of wanting to name me Prudence. I wouldn't have minded being called Prudence, but that's just me. Now I have an even weirder name that nobody knows how to pronounce because of a popular TV show.
I feel like going through high school being called Prude would have been rough though.
At least they would have been able to pronounce my name correctly then. A senior guy I was friends with started calling me by an incorrect pronunciation of my first and last names as a joke. Now most of my band does it. It's funny but also confusing for people who don't know my actual name. When I got a solo in marching band, my name was announced over the speaker as that exact wrong pronunciation of my name. I just shared a look of annoyance with the drum major and accepted it as a fact of my life. Also, that senior came back after he graduated to help at band camp this year and educated the freshmen on my incorrect name that they were to call me. I was like, "Thanks, Michael, I really appreciate it."
My mother's name. My grandmother wanted to name her Ishbel, and my grandfather wanted to name her Laura. So they got a baby name book, and the first name they agreed on would be her name. Her name is Wanda. My ex wanted to name my son Jagger, pronounced either Jagger or Jagger, or Schottenjagger. That was a no. Everyone talked me out of naming my daughter Evelyn, and nickname Evie. It's a family name, but apparently it's for older women only. My wife and I both loved the name Evelyn, and it would have been our daughter's name, but a close coworker had her daughter 2 weeks prior to us and named her Evelyn first. We felt awkward picking the same name, so we settled on our second choice. Also, I think Evie is a cute nickname. Again, not quite what was being asked, but a friend of mine was almost called Apollo. To be fair, he was born on the day of the first moon landing in 1969, and his dad is Greek. His mum put her foot down, though, and he ended up being Alexander, which is still a good Greek name. Okay, technically Macedonian, but the Greeks claim him too. I was young and stupid in the 80s when my daughter was born. I really wanted to name her Frisbee, because I was just certain that Frisbee last name was going to be the coolest girl in school. Nothing ever came of my bad idea. My daughter's name is Jennifer now. My dad is the third, and I would have been the fourth if I was born a dude. He still wanted to name me Roberta Edwina, his female version. Yikes. When I was in basic training back in the early 2000s, there was a guy whose last name was Starcruiser. I found out from one of his division mates that his full name was Mercury Sun Starcruiser, and that his dad apparently was a massive Star Wars geek after seeing the original way back in the 70s, and that he'd legally changed his last name to Starcruiser. This guy was not in my division, but was in one of the ones that was housed in the same building my division was in. So I'd seen him a few times. Turns out he was also married, and she was in a different division at the time as well. What was the worst experience you had in elementary school? I was running around the playground, saw a couple of girls with a small milk carton between them, ran through and kicked it. Turns out they had a pet hamster or squirrel in it. I killed the pet right in front of them. I felt bad about that for my whole life, and I'm 54 now. My father did that. I'd just gotten a hamster and it was rolling around in one of those balls while we put the cage together. He came home from work and thought I got a sports ball or something and happily kicked it at me. I got a new hamster. Wanna play sports ball, son? Why would someone put a hamster inside a milk carton? They're just kids. They wanted to carry it around and figured that'd be fine. I was bullied a lot and also had a bad haircut. One day in class, all of us students were sitting in a line while the teacher spoke. Halfway through, the teacher stopped talking. He walked up to me and pulled on my hair, saying, "Is this for real?" He then erupted with laughter, and so did the rest of the class. As they all laughed at me, I felt mortified. I wanted to die. I will never forget that moment. I had terrible, terrible hair throughout my childhood at all different stages. And I had this happen in various situations where the teacher would add to how terrible it was by constantly questioning my hair and bringing attention to it during class in front of the other classmates. They allowed me to be constantly bullied by my classmates in front of them without doing a darn thing. I remember when I was in the 4th grade, my mum gave me my brother's lunch by accident. I asked if I could go to his classroom so we could swap. I knocked on the door and asked for him. At the time, I had very short, curly hair. My mother made me get it all cut off as I had head lice that she couldn't get rid of. I'm female. After I asked for him, a little boy asked, "Are you a girl or a boy?" The entire class erupted with laughter and pointed at me, most loudly the teacher, who was in hysterics. He just kept laughing too. I walked out and waited for my brother to come while I could hear them in the background. It was mortifying. Another time, my mum took me to a clothes shop where she knew the owner. He invited me out back as his sons were there with their pet mice. I spent about 30 minutes with them and we went to leave and he said, "You have a lovely son." Oh well, I'm a somewhat attractive woman now, and the teacher who laughed at me was fired for his inappropriate behavior with students later. Sometimes karma is slow for people who have a rough time in school, if it happens at all. Glad things worked out for this nice lady. In 2nd grade, we sat at desks arranged in groups of 4 with 2 pairs of desks facing each other. I was grasping the front edge of the desk and this kid slammed his desk against my fingers. Not sure if it was intentional, but it really hurt. I started crying. The teacher noticed, and instead of dealing with the situation in a sane way befitting a 2nd grade teacher, her punishment for the boy was to have me slam my desk against his fingers. I told her it was okay because what the frick, I really didn't want to do that, but she made me do it anyway. She was a terrible teacher. Damn, that's pretty effed up and traumatizing for a 2nd grader. What happened to her? Is she still around? I remember her being pretty old, so she's probably retired or dead by now. I loaded my pants in kindergarten. Then I stepped on it. Then I proceeded to walk it around the classroom. When asked if I did it, I denied the act even though the footprints led to me and my pants smelled pretty bad. I got sent home. Many of those kids probably don't remember, but some nights I lie in bed, thinking about what might have been if I just went to the bathroom.
I work in an elementary school now. A few years ago, one of the kindergarten teachers pulled me aside and told me, "I have a pooper in my class. I can't figure out who it is." Somehow, someone who didn't wear underwear with their pants was relieving themselves, and the logs were falling out of the leg pants and onto the floor. This was causing her stress because some kids would accidentally step in it and tread it around the classroom, making a mess. A few days later, the teacher was walking down the hall and catches my eye. She seemed less stressed than the previous couple of days. She came over to me and said, "So, I found the poopatrator today." It was as if he had no idea he was doing it. In other words, your experience isn't unheard of.
I got really sick once. My mother sent me to school despite the fact that I felt awful. I walked into the bathroom, spewed all over the floor, and then proceeded to crap my pants. I locked myself in a stall until the teacher came, cleaned me up, and brought me to the nurse. One day as a child, I woke up feeling sick. Mum sends me to school anyway. I get there, immediately go to the nurse's office. They refuse to examine me without a pass from my teacher. I go across the building to my first class to get one, by which point I'm late. The teacher refuses to let me into the room without a pass from the principal's office. I go back across the building, spend a few minutes waiting in a crowd of fellow late students, go back to class, give teacher his pass, go back to the nurse's office, give nurse her pass, nurse examines me, immediately declares me highly contagious, and sends me back home.
You're a lucky mother fricker. My mom forced me to go to school and I was sick with the flu. I felt sick and in the middle of class I silently threw up on my desk. I covered it for 15 minutes. When class ended, everyone left and the teacher confronted me, asking me what was wrong. I raised my head to have spew coming off my face and shirt. She starts gagging and I ran for the bathroom, leaving trails of spew. Worst day ever.
There's one story that will always stick in my mind. I was in the 3rd grade and we were supposed to bring back signed permission slips from our trip to the library. The only person in class who didn't bring his permission slip was a friend of mine. My 3rd grade teacher thought it'd be appropriate to interrogate him in front of the entire class as to why he didn't bring it. He responded that he would be unable to attend and she continued to press him. All of a sudden, he bursts into tears and explains that he has to attend a funeral. You'd think she'd have the brains to stop there, right? Wrong. She still has the nerve to ask, "Whose?" I'll never forget the look on his face when he replies, "My mum's." I freaking hated that teacher so much for so many other reasons too. He moved about a week after that and his father got in contact with our family, updating on their status, which wasn't exactly great. That was my worst experience. I can't imagine how hard it must have been for him.
Oh gosh, this reminds me of a story. I went to a Catholic school from kindergarten through to the 6th grade. In the 3rd grade, 8, one of my friend's mothers died. Needless to say, the kid was out of school for a couple of weeks. When he finally returned, he was having a difficult time, obviously. One day during class, he was crying, and our female teacher told him to stop being such a baby and that his mother was no good anyways. I recall telling my mother about it because it really disturbed me at that age. Heck, it disturbs me now. I'm sorry, Paul. I hope you're doing great.
I called my teacher Mum. I then tried to correct myself and referred to her as the names of several other teachers before shutting up and trying to phase into my chair. Haha, I as well called my teacher Mom once. Luckily it was the beginning of recess and most kids were hurrying to get outside, so most of them didn't hear it. Plus I was 5, almost 6, and super tiny for my age, which according to my teacher made my mistake the cutest thing ever. She even picked me up when the rest of the kids were outside. I was so flustered by my mistake that I hadn't even moved, and she said she wished she was my mom. She was a pretty cool teacher. I feel like this happens to greater than 1/3 of students, just by this cliché's appearance in media and how often you hear about it happening in general from your friends. Had a teacher tell me I was a slacker when all I wanted to do was mind my own business. She constantly took me out into the hall because I wasn't talking as much as I should, and lectured me how I was disturbing everyone else. Even had my parents come in at one point. "Sorry I was a quiet kid, lady." "So you were disturbing people with your silence?" "Yeah, I even burst into tears at one point. I didn't know what I was doing wrong and this lady didn't let up. It scarred me."
I always go with the whole, We're worried about you. You don't ask as many questions as the other kids thing. Of course, I was quiet, and I'd always think that the reason you ask questions in class is because you don't understand something. I understood everything as a child. Turns out they just wanted me to outwardly express a bit more interest. There was this lady at my school who taught special ed, who was a typical scary-faced witch. One day she took us to indoor recess. Our normal teacher couldn't take us for some reason, and I was skipping happily like a normal child would do. She immediately scolds me and says that I can't play in recess. I had to sit in a chair in the corner of the gym while I watched all of my friends play some weird game. After the first round of the game was over, I got to go play with them because I assumed that my punishment wasn't as severe as sitting out the whole time. Nope, I was yelled at and told to sit back down. For skipping, like the happy child that I was. We had a teacher like that too. She was the special ed principal as well. She told lots of kids off for fast walking and made everyone sit for an extra 10 minutes at lunch so the owner of a chip packet would pick it up, and scolded a kid who tried to pick it up and end the madness, and had to have the principal of the regular school tell her to wear a better brassiere. She was horrible and scary. Speech therapy. The kids in my grade level were pretty cool and didn't make fun of me for having a speech impediment. I was actually well liked. I only felt different during speech therapy. Nothing felt worse than when your teacher is standing in front of the class and the speech therapist has to interrupt the lesson to take you, and only you, out of the class. This happened on a weekly basis, mind you. I say this for all school-based speech-language pathologists. I'm so sorry for ever making you feel anything less than brilliant. We think we're helping. I try to take students from the same class out at the same time to make it seem more natural. Also, I try to make the sessions interesting and rewarding, so I hardly ever have a student who doesn't want to go to speech. Unless the class is in the middle of something new and super cool, then I engage in the activity with the class for a bit until there's a better stopping time. I've actually had 2 students fake having a trouble with a certain sound just so that they could see what speech was all about. However, no one can pull students out of the classroom at random, so their adorable attempt at getting out of class went unsuccessfully. Again, sorry for any hard feelings. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I didn't speak good English when I first moved to the US in 3rd grade. I didn't know that frick was a swear word. I used it casually. One time the teacher asked, "Who first settled the town that I live in?" I responded, "The fricking British." I got suspended for 3 days. Pro tip, before moving to another country, learn which words are offensive and don't say them to your teacher. Your suspension seems pretty harsh for a new kid. That's a solid answer though, and you should stand by it. That's hilarious. I actually did something similar in 3rd grade. Having just moved to France, I asked in a rude way if I could go and take a leak. Je peux aller pisser? Not knowing that pisser was a swear word. I didn't get suspended or anything, but everyone in the class got a good laugh out of it. Some of my friends still bring it up now, about 12 years later. This butthole kid stabbed me in the shoulder with a metal fork during a snowball fight. Who brings a knife to a snowball fight? Only a lunatic, but a fork? It's understandable. I see you've played snowy, spoony, knifey, forky before. My mother sent me to school very sick one day, and I was having a horrible time to say the least. Nauseous, fever, cough, but I couldn't stay home as she had a very important job interview, so I pretended I was a lot better than I was for her. About half an hour into school, I got this feeling in the pit of my stomach. Oh God. I proceeded to walk over to where everyone kept their backpacks, where nobody could see me, found the nearest one, and filled it with my spew. I was a dumb kid, so I looked around to make sure no one saw. The storage was around the corner from the class desks, and they were having playmat time so nobody noticed me, and I put the poor kid's backpack back on its hook. 2 hours later during lunch, I heard a scream, followed by a couple of students getting sick all over the lunchroom tables and floor. And that boy whose bag I spewed in was crying his fricking eyes out. The teacher basically interrogated the class, and I finally burst into tears and admitted it was me. I was sent to the nurse, then detention, and my mother never looked so angry with me when she picked me up. As for the kid, he didn't talk to me for 2 weeks and then told me he hated me and that my spew smelled like his cat's litter box. We started dating 8 years later and we're still together. Ha ha ha! In this more negative story grouping, it can be quite nice to come across the odd one that has a happy ending, so thanks for that. 3rd grade, we had chair desks. Look them up.
Mine had a lot of clutter under the seat, and the teacher told me to clean it before class was over. Now, I wasn't going very fast, but I didn't have much time either. The bell rang and I was still cleaning. The teacher got really angry at me. I don't remember what she said, but she was mad, really furious. She picked up the whole desk, I fell out, and she dumps everything out of it and onto me, then throws it down. The desk slammed into the ground inches to my side. Needless to say, I was terrified by this whole thing. I told my mum told the principal, and they called the police. But I was too scared to say a word to the officers. I just bawled into my mum's arm. With nothing from me, there wasn't much they could do. At least I was moved to a different class. My first grade teacher also used to dump students' desks, sometimes with students still in them, out as well. She was a C-word. I'm sorry you had to experience this too. I will never understand why people like that decide to work with children if they hate them so much. Some of them just don't know they hate children until they've spent a decade teaching them. Okay, so my first grade teacher was a total butthead who was constantly doing things that probably should have gotten him fired, like telling the entire class that they should never be like me and using my art project as an example of what everyone shouldn't do, singling me out, openly mocking me and my family in front of class, forcing me to go to a kindergarten class so he could use me as a bad example there, among other things. I'm almost positive that he hated me. The worst thing, though, happened one day during our math time. I was in the advanced math class and had already learned what we, as a class, were doing on a worksheet. Because of this, I worked ahead and finished it before the other kids. This prompted him to take my sheet, scream at me for working ahead of the class or not paying attention, violently rip up my worksheet, throw it to the garbage, and make me start over. It was more humiliating than anything up to that point, and the only time I'd ever been punished for being smart. In conclusion, my first grade teacher was literally a walking, talking sphincter. My teacher did something similar to me in 6th grade. I went to a private Christian school that was known for being less academically advanced than the other schools in the area, and I was pretty far ahead of a lot of the people in my grade. I also had ADHD, diagnosed but untreated, so during lectures I'd get bored and quietly work ahead. The teacher caught me one day and ripped up my work in front of the class in the middle of her lecture. I told my mom and the teacher ended up getting fired, sort of a last straw deal, I guess. Good riddance. Frick you, Mrs. Myers. I remember another time I was reading after finishing my work, and she confiscated my book and made some sort of snide comment about it. She was mad that I wasn't double-checking my work. I ended up going to the principal and he got it back from me since Mrs. Myers refused to give it up until the end of the week, even though it was a library book. Oh my god, frick you, Mrs. Myers again. I had long hair in kindergarten or 1st grade, I can't quite remember, but a kid used to always tease me about it, saying I looked like a girl. I'm a dude. Anyway, I dragged him out into our little cubby space in class and gave him a haircut with safety scissors. The old ones cut hair pretty well. Got in a ton of trouble. By the way, if you lived in Las Vegas 20 years ago, and this was you, my bad. You don't lie about those scissors. When I was really young and coloring in class, I think this was in kindergarten, I was getting annoyed at my hair for falling in my face, so I just grabbed the safety scissors and gave myself bangs. According to the teacher, I did a really good job at them too. When I was a kid, I was sloppy and disorganized. It wasn't on purpose. I just for some reason felt compelled to shove papers in my desk at school rather than sort them out. I was embarrassed by it and didn't want anyone to look at my desk. Like all kids, I had a crush. My crush that year was a kid named Johnny. I wrote his name in my notebook with little hearts all around it, and it became part of the mass of crumpled up papers in my desk that I'd forgotten about. One day, in the middle of class, my evil witch of a teacher noticed that my desk was sloppy, again, and decided to embarrass me by dumping out all of the contents of my desk right in front of the entire class, and then going through all of the papers one by one and reading them out loud. Eventually, she came across the paper that had Johnny's name written on it and said, "Ah, looks like someone has a crush on Johnny," out loud to the entire class. I turned bright red and tried to take the papers out of her hand, which apparently offended her, so she told me to get my hands off her. Kids never stopped teasing me after that. I couldn't even look at Johnny without blushing and wanting to cry. Fricking hate that B-word to this day. A group of boys who were a few years older than me, I was 6 and they were 12, would relentlessly chase me around the school every lunchtime. I'd hide in the toilets until I was sure they got bored of waiting. I told teachers, but they never did anything. Honestly, I lived in fear of them all year until they left for high school. They were double my age and like 3 times my size. It was horrible. Something similar happened with my little brother. He was in the 2nd grade and these 2 5th graders were cutting in line in front of my brother and his friends. My brother, knowing this is wrong, tells the 5th grader that they can't cut in line. Somehow, one of the 5th graders decides to hit my brother, and my brother hit him back, and they started fighting until a lunch lady stopped them. They both got a 3-day in-school suspension. If they hit you first, then you can hit them back in defense. Now that I think about it, this situation isn't that similar to yours, but oh well, I'm still sorry it happened to you. I wonder if bullying is more or less the same in the modern day and age compared to how it was when I, and the writers of these posts, were in school in the 90s or earlier. I can't help but feel like teachers have much stricter training on how to deal with this sort of thing in most countries now. When I was in 2nd grade, I had a crush on this one girl, and when we were on a field trip, I saw this ladybug ring for sale. I bought it knowing she liked ladybugs and waited for the right time to give it to her. I ended up doing it at the end of the field trip as we were gathering our stuff in front of her friends. She laughed in my face and refused the gift. I felt like crap and threw it out. In the 1st grade, I went to this private church school where all of the teachers were relatively strict about rules, and kids leaving class to go to the restroom among other things. One day, during singing time, I really had to go pee. I asked the teacher politely if I could use the restroom real quick and promised to be right back. The teacher told me I'd have to wait until recess to use it. Recess was right after singing time. While singing time is going on, a giant thunderstorm moves in and begins a torrential downpour, while the teacher thinks it would be a great idea for the class to sing the rainy day song to coincide with the storm. As the class is singing the song, I try as hard as I can not to think about how badly I need to pee and begin trying to count the grains of wood in my desk. Needless to say, it didn't help. About halfway through the rainy day song, and when the torrential downpour outside was at its worst, I ended up peeing my pants and creating a giant pool of pee beneath my desk. I was in tears, and when the teacher noticed what had happened, I was immediately taken down to the office to get a change of clothes. Since I was a girl and happened to be wearing a dress that day, I ended up having to wear some Polynesian top meant for a boy and boy shorts. My 4th grade teacher would always ridicule me in front of the class for not being able to learn my multiplication tables. I'm dyscalculic. I hated 4th grade so much. It was a nightmare. I crapped my pants while doing a speech in front of the class. My teacher had not one sympathetic bone in her body and treated me as if I'd punched her elderly mother in the face. I was a bathroom monitor with my friend. He took the boy one, I had the girl one, and they were obviously next to each other. We were just talking and messing around, and at one point I jokingly held his shoulders for whatever reason, and this teacher starts screaming down the hall for me to let go of him, what am I doing, etc. I also had the meanest 1st grader teacher who didn't believe that I wasn't bullying him, and kept demanding that I do to her what I did to him to prove it. I still freaking hate both of those teachers. My kindergarten teacher changed my card from green to yellow because I tugged at another girl's t-shirt to tell her that I thought it was pretty. I've got to be honest, I flipped out like SpongeBob did in that one episode where he got a good noodle star taken away. Massage therapists and customers, what was your strangest experience during the process? I'm a male companion for hire and give special massages. My prices are very high compared to a regular massage, and no one can really mistake what you're buying. Also, the website I advertise on is full of undressed buff dudes, so there's really no confusion. Well, one day I receive a call from a man asking if I'm available. He said he'd like a massage at his office in the middle of downtown. I didn't think much of this as I've done this kink for a few people before. They normally run a small business and nobody is there at that time of night. Innocent enough. But this guy requested it to be at lunch and gave me the address to a bustling building. When I arrived, it was filled with people in a beautiful open space office. I brought my massage table and people were making light conversation with me thinking I'm a legit masseuse. This was way out of my comfort zone. I'm used to dealing with pervy guys in dim-lit rooms, not talking to Karen and her friends interested in booking a massage. When I finally met the guy, he led me through to a maze of people and departments. Everyone was staring as I was dressed like a man-ho, while everyone else was in business attire. Tank top, grey sweats, and no underwear. Gotta dress the part, you know? He leads me to an open room that had been converted into a massage area, meaning there's no doors, just a paper curtain divider that blocks the view from his co-workers. I started the massage and was thinking, he can't possibly think I would do anything here, right? This is insane. After 30 minutes, I get a sense that something is off. I'd glide my hands to more intimate areas, but he keeps talking casually. Most guys would pop a tent, or ask to be massaged near their groin, or start touching my junk. but he was talking about his wife and daughters. I immediately asked him how he found out about me. He told me it was a recommendation from one of his friends, then started going on about his relationship with this guy and how they have a very strong friendship and that they would constantly prank each other. I froze and my heart dropped. This guy thinks this is a legit massage. This was supposed to be a prank that somehow got way too advanced without any party knowing. Hence why I'm in the middle of a tech office and he's so nonchalant about everything. I immediately went real masseuse and focused on his knots for the remainder of the time. He paid me my ridiculous fee and made a small comment about it being expensive for a massage, but it was good and convenient. I was beyond terrified as I was seconds away from doing some highly inappropriate things to this man right in the middle of his office, feet from his co-workers. This is my most eerie experience I've had yet. What's the strangest experience during the massage process? The one where the guy didn't try to do the deed with me. Did you level with him after and explain what you were actually there for? It seems like that would have been a great way to get an extra tip or something. I know I would have really appreciated knowing about that. No, I thought it might be way too embarrassing for him, especially at work. Instead, I really tried to give him the best massage possible and speak nothing of this. Until now. That is brilliant. I would have gently let him know at the end, or perhaps the client, blissfully unaware, recommended this gentleman onward at his usual rates and everyone profited. Not a massage therapist, but my dad is, and this is one of his favorite stories. When his clients come in, he gives them a list of Pandora stations to choose from for the session. A client comes in one day and picks 50s jazz, so like Ella Fitzgerald and stuff. The thing about some of these women from the 50s, some of their songs were not so subtly raunchy. One comes in and it's about a woman asking her lover when he's coming home, but she's singing lines like, "When are you gonna come? I can't wait for you to come. Come for me, baby. I love it when you come for me." He's in the middle of working on this woman's glutes when the song comes on and pauses to see if she's awake. She hasn't said anything for a while, so he figures she's just gone to sleep. It's a pain to stop what he's in the middle of working on, walk over to the phone and wipe all the massage oil from his fingers just to skip the song, so he makes a mental note to remove it from the playlist and keeps working. A few minutes later, when the song reaches its climax of a woman begging her lover to come, his massage bottle runs out of oil. Not a problem, he always keeps a spare on his hip because this happens. The thing is, sometimes when the bottle is being filled up, a bubble of air gets caught in the tube inside and it comes out with the first pump. He goes to pump the oil into his hand, and a mixture of oil and air comes out with a loud splooge sound, like a cartoonish imitation of a man reaching completion. He freezes, one hand on the pump and the other on this woman's butt. She didn't react, so again he thinks she's probably asleep. Then her entire body starts shaking with laughter. They're both laughing so hard they need to take a break from the massage to compose themselves. Thank God she was chill and found it just as funny as he did. I had a very eccentric, read creepy as frick client who came into our clinic one day wanting a Tui Na massage, type of Chinese massage. We usually leave the room to let the clients strip down into underwear before we commence, but with this guy I had no chance to get away. Before I had time to give him the towel, he dropped his pants to reveal a sparkling blue G-string that barely kept everything in place. The guy was about 58, huge beer gut, grey hair, gold earrings, and hairy like Robin Williams. As I started the massage, the guy started to tell me that he worked as a bedroom masseuse specializing in body slide massage. This is where the masseuse gets oiled up and rubs his body and fun bits all over before doing the deed with the client at the end. The whole time I was massaging him, he kept telling me that I was really good with my hands. He also repeatedly told me how good he was at his job and plugging his business with a hinting tone. A very awkward session.
I enjoy a good butt massage, but I don't enjoy the amount of focus it takes to keep it at half-mast, at most for 90 minutes, instead of enjoying the massage so the undies stay on the bundies.
I'm a licensed massage therapist. Seriously, let yourself relax. We've seen it all and we don't judge. Yes, whenever I see this happen to someone, I might get a little excited too because we're all human. But because I'm a licensed massage therapist, it's my responsibility and profession to ignore all indecent but natural aspects and continue to focus on the fundamental muscles during the massage. We're all human. Massage is obviously a delicate topic, so when we establish the expectations and boundaries before the massage begins, everyone can feel safe and know exactly what will and won't happen.
I can never do this relaxing thing. I always decline any glute and thigh workout out of guilt.
There's no problem with that. Professionally trained licensed massage therapists will never touch you anywhere you don't want to be touched. We discuss the full parameters of the session before the session begins. No surprises, just relaxation. It's common to have difficulty relaxing, and that's why it's recommended to book a 90-minute or 120-minute massage, because people often don't begin to relax until 45 minutes into the session. This is a therapeutic human touch. It's safe, it's beneficial. Every human needs human touch, and the client has full control over everything. Massage therapists are professionally trained to respect every client, make you feel safe and comfortable, never do anything you don't want to do. I had a guy tell me, "Stop teasing, you know exactly what you're doing, don't start me up and not finish." Studying to be licensed, but I volunteer my services at a harm reduction clinic. From 7 through 9 p.m., I work at a massage palace as the receptionist. People used to come in all the time to ask how much massages were, and usually that was the extent of the conversation. One day a bloke walked in and asked how much the massages were, so I told him. Then he asked me in an overly friendly voice if I did the massages. I naively plowed on with, "No, not me, they're done by..." when my boss walked out of the consultation room he'd been in with a client and said, "I do the massages, can I help you?" The guy looked instantly sheepish and couldn't get out the door fast enough. My boss said he'd overheard the guy ask if I did the massages and knew something wasn't right. Told me that if that ever happened again, to just say I would get the masseur for him and walk out. I'm so glad your boss was awesome, to be honest. Yeah, he was a good guy all round. He said they don't come in often, but you get the odd one. All 3 masseurs were men, and they were all nice guys, so I was well looked after. What a gross weirdo. Look, as the first story indicated, more intimate masseurs do exist, but don't go in expecting if it's not advertised, folks. I do home visits. I'm a male masseur, by the way. Had a particular client 3 times. Usually I have clients stripped down to their undies. The second session, he got undressed, but I didn't think much of it as he seemed okay. At the end of the third session, as I was massaging his neck while he's on his back, he just started cranking it. I was kind of shocked in the moment and didn't know what to do. He reached for my hand as if to get me to finish him off, and at that point I stood up and said I've got to go. Was fairly awkward waiting for him to get dressed so I could pack my table and get my money and leave. I've had a couple of incidents in my 5 years. Female therapists would have it much worse. Sucks that massage is associated with that sort of thing because I really like helping people overcome aches and mobility issues, but it's hard to advertise without getting calls from guys wanting their eggplant tugged. My girlfriend is an LAC, and this dude used to come in and get acupuncture and crank it during the session. It never had anything to do with her, and he never asked her help or anything. He just needed to be getting needled while he was doing it. He paid her a lot more than her usual sessions and apparently had trouble getting off otherwise. He is almost 40 years her senior, and I've heard their sessions before. He truly just needed acupuncture to get off. She was never super comfortable with it, but it was good money, and eventually we didn't need that money, so she put a stop to it. He was totally respectful of that too. He never made a move and was always communicating very openly and honestly about what he needed. Pretty nice guy, if not a bit strange. He needed acupuncture to get off. What a prick. I live in China, and despite this idea of happy endings places, they're getting harder and harder to find in Shanghai, thank God. Massages here are as normal as going bowling or going for a coffee. It's fantastic and I have at least 2 a month. Nothing more lovely than a 90-foot massage. I usually fall asleep. What's a 90-foot massage in metric units? They parade 45 Chinese ladies down your back. Or occasionally 15 old women using walkers. Nothing more lovely than a 27 1/3 of a meter massage. I usually fall asleep. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My parents own a spa that I used to work at. I have a crap ton of stories, but here's a goodie. At one point, we had 2 male massage therapists. Now, I worked in the call center, and before booking a massage, we'd always clarify if the client was comfortable seeing a male massage therapist, as we had a majority female clientele. But one day, this male client booked a massage for himself with our male therapist, Ed. He was a new client and actually requested a male. Whatever. Guy goes in for his appointment, and the first half is normal. The guy is undressed on the table, with a blanket covering his lower half. First half of the massage, he's on his stomach. Then Ed tells him to go ahead and flip over on his back to continue. This fricker flips over and hands Ed a wad of cash from who knows where saying, "That's for you," and starts to feed the goose. Ed promptly said, "Alright, your appointment is done, they'll take care of you at the front desk," and books it out of there. The guy pays and leaves with no problem. Here's the kicker. Ed never told my parents, a manager, nothing. We only found out through work gossip, but because we didn't know about this creep, the guy ended up calling and scheduling another appointment with Ed. We found out shortly after booking the scoop, and the guy was asked to not come back. The spa's a pretty upscale place in the triple-digit price range, so not sure if the guy just thought we were an expensive spa with a side hustle or a really cheap brothel. They'll take care of you at the front desk.
Well, this is a strange joint.
Walks over to the front desk with his junk out. I get a call from my friend one night. Her boss wants a massage and she recommended me. Since he's my friend's boss, I don't really worry too much and head over to this dude's place with my gear. When I first come in and have everything set up, the guy offers me a Vegas bomb. I pass and the massage starts as normal. Everything is going normal. This guy was Indian, I think, and was saying how this is great. He would recommend me to all his friends and stuff. But about halfway through, I hear, "Do you do happy ending?" My hands just froze. No one had ever asked me that before. My friends make jokes and all, but I'd never had this conversation with the client seriously asking this. The conversation goes like this. "Do you do a happy ending?" No. "Why not?" "Because that's disgusting and unprofessional." "I'll pay extra." "We're done here." I stopped the massage, packed up my gear, told him to pay the full price and left. Once I was home, I called up my friend to tell her what a creep her boss was. She started laughing her butt off. Apparently he had asked her if I did happy endings, and she thought he was joking and joked back yes.
Comparing to the other posts in this thing, at least he asked.
I was previously a certified massage therapist and nothing creepy or raunchy. I've been physically attracted to clients before, but it's drilled into your head that this is absolutely not the setting to pursue this. There was maybe one odd thing that isn't at all odd, but was similarly distracting to me. I always drape the client so the top of the sheet is up to their armpits. So guys, and girls obviously, have their chests covered. This one guy though kept folding the sheet down to just under his chest. I'd keep moving him and adjusting the sheet, but he would eventually fold it back down. The edge of the sheet perfectly underlined his moobs, and I just kept getting distracted by them. They were like two eyes staring at me.
I have a rare medical condition where I breathe through my chest. I once had a massage therapist repeatedly try to suffocate me.
I wonder if the chest had a particularly chiseled set of pecs and thought that they needed to be admired by the world. Although it's more likely a sensitivity thing, right? My wife and I were at a small resort in Costa Rica. When we go on vacations, she always gets massages, but I never do. This time we decided to get a couple's massage. We get in the room, and the two are waiting for us by each table. She had this Latin love god, and I got a cute girl in her early 30s. They tell us to take off our clothes and give us these little paper undies, and then leave the room. The room was nice. It had a little fountain with some foliage and some soothing sound from speakers. We each looked at the paper undies and laughed and decided to forego them. It just seemed too silly. They started the massage and it felt good. She'd stretch my arm and then start working it, first going over it lightly, then gradually getting harder. The time came to do my butt. She moved the towel down and started massaging my cheeks, then the inside of my cheeks, which I thought was odd, but I'm new to the massage world and maybe that's what a deep tissue massage was. At this time I'm starting to feel, not relaxed but insecure. I suddenly became aware of my wife next to me who sounds more than relaxed. Meanwhile, back at my butt, she was doing the inside of the cheeks well. I'd hoped this was the last spot she'd do there. The last thing I want is butt cheek sweat rubbed all over my body. Then she started to press down on my actual butthole. I felt pressure building up behind her thumb. I clench, and I clench like I've never clenched before. I spin around and say very politely, "Thank you for the massage." My wife, "Our spa time isn't up yet," and I told her we have to go now. I told my wife what happened, and she laughed at me and said, "Only to you." And now this is her favorite story to tell.
Wife, do you remember that time we went on vacation and that cute girl finger blasted you in your turd cutter?
Why must you bring that up every Thanksgiving? Someone I know, they're female, said that while doing a Brazilian wax on a male, he arrived. She just wiped it up and remained professional. I don't know how.
I mean, you can't control stuff like that, it's biology. So long as he was apologetic about it and not creepy, I don't see this being a big deal.
I have a friend who is a licensed massage therapist and has been studying medicine and been around doctors for much of his life. One of his sessions with a regular female client, while she was face down and he was in front of her, by her head, working on her back, she reached up and grabbed his butt. He asked what she was doing and she said, "Sorry, I don't know, I couldn't help myself." He told her not to do that again and the rest of the session continued as normal. At the end of the session, he got her a glass of water and as he turned around to leave, she grabbed his butt again. She apologized and seemed genuinely upset and embarrassed and insisted that she just couldn't help herself. My friend ponders for a moment before doing a peripheral vision check on her. Her vision is way below what is normal. Massage therapist calls the client's husband and suggests that they go see a doctor. because there might be something wrong with her impulse control and vision, suggesting it might be some sort of frontal lobe problem. Sure enough, a few days later she had an MRI and there was a tumor developing in her frontal lobe. Glioblastoma, I think. I forget the exact medical language he used. It was removed and she's doing fine now. Believe me or not, I had a massage with a girl once and she was new. Before I flipped over from my stomach, she whispers, "Anything else I can do or focus on before you turn over?" Based on the place being one of the most popular places nationwide, I figured she meant it in a strictly professional manner. I said no, I turned over and she massaged my legs, no problems. But when she does my arms, she rests my hands on her chest slightly, and I had to think about my grandma so hard to keep from getting in trouble. We finished the massage and I left. I rescheduled and got her again a few weeks later, and she had changed up her style to rest my arm on her rolling chair for that. So someone must have mentioned something. When I was in school, I'd place an ad for in-home services as a means for getting me more practice and also to make some extra cash on the side. I did this while working 40 hours a week and going to school 10 hours a day on my days off. It was a pretty exhausting few months. Because I went to people's homes, I had some pretty specific steps about how I screened clients, being very clear about what services I was giving. It's a relaxation massage booked by the hour. I bring my table and you're fully draped up during this. Most people that were looking for something more were pretty upfront and rarely pushy, but I ended up with some good clients that were just busy or traveled into town regularly and didn't have time to visit a spa. One Friday, I was home in the evening and laying down for a nap when my phone rang with someone looking to book an appointment. I gave them the spiel about what I offered and prices, and he asked if he could get a massage without the blanket. Some people ask this, so I always liked to bring up how cold someone tends to get during a massage. The draping is for privacy. If you get overheated, I can just drape your waist, etc. When they hear this, most people got the point or were understanding. He was mildly fussy about the sheet, so I offered draping his waist with a towel. He responded saying this was fine, but I could. The phone started breaking up. I checked to see if he was still there. He was. We just hit a bad reception patch, no big deal. I confirmed the time and place and set the appointment for around 8 p.m. When I arrived at the client's townhouse, I woke up and I heard loud music playing. All I'm thinking of is that I hope he can hear me as I knock on the door, which opened to blast my ears with smooth R&B and revealed an old white man wearing a sleeveless coral shirt with ruffles. It looked like something an older woman would pick up from Walmart to dress casually in. I think nothing of it. Who am I to judge what weird clothes this guy wants to wear? And walk in, also noticing he's not wearing pants. Okay, whatever, he's Donald ducking around his apartment getting ready for a massage. But he's clearly wearing some kind of undies, so I don't acknowledge it. As I set up my table, focusing on my work rather than his odd attire, I make polite conversation. As I'm ready to go, I say that I need to change the music so I can focus and he can relax, and that I'll wash my hands. While I do that, he can climb onto the table and get under the towel on his back. This is when I turn to change the CD in his player, and I can see out of the corner of my eyes, as he took off the top, that he's wearing underneath the frilliest pair of lacy panties. This is not the most normal of situations, but I think I have two options. 1. This guy is a weirdo pervert and wants to get a reaction out of me for wearing something shocking. 2. This guy is into wearing ladies' clothing and this is how he gets to be in private. No matter what the actual answer, my best course of action is to not acknowledge his attire and go about the session. I worked through, did my routine as normal while he was on his back and focused on my work. For the most part, it was pretty standard massage, though I did have to fight the compulsion to flip the tag of his panties back inside his underwear, lest I call attention to them. But when I did this, he kept splaying his legs out, which, when I wasn't thinking, gave me a glance at his berries hanging out from that lace. His legs were pushed back together and I kept my eyes on the floor after that. At the end of the session, I cleaned up quickly, thanked him, collected my money, and left. At the end of it, he paid me 3 times my rate, which was nice. It was still an awkward session, though. In conclusion, I made money giving a normal massage to a guy wearing women's lingerie. I still don't know if it was a kink or his lifestyle. What's your most embarrassing doctor's office story?
So, yesterday I went to the doctor for some intestinal bleeding. My doctor is fairly new to the office, and I've only met her once before this. I'm only 21, so I've never had a reason for a doctor to go knuckle deep in my rectum before, but the doctor insisted that it needed to be done for some tests. So I bend over the table and she lubes up and digs for treasure. I hadn't dropped one out in a day or so because it hurts when I do so I was a bit stopped up. Upon starting to pull out, I immediately realized what's about to happen and try everything in my power to stop it. Too late. Doctor pulls her finger out and plop, out lands a turd right on the floor. I was able to hold back the rest, but the damage was done. In conclusion, dropped a steaming hot log right on the floor of my doctor's office.
Mine's not so much embarrassing as it is awesome. I had the mumps during my first year of college, and along with that I got orchitis, the swelling of the testicles caused by the mumps, in my left nut, which swelled up to the size of a potato. It was really painful and heavy, so I had to carry it everywhere for a while. So I went to the doctor's. He checked my mumps, and then I told him there was another problem. I dropped trow, lay on the doctor bed thing, and he came over to examine. He laughed when he saw it, because it was frickin' huge, and he said, "What seems to be the problem?" jokingly. At that moment, I pointed to my regular-sized bollock and said, "This one shrank." Cue the 5-minute laughter from the doc. When I turned 30, I suddenly became a hypochondriac. I thought that everything was cancer or worse. So I'm seeing my doctor, who is a racquetball buddy, for my annual physical, and I mentioned that I was having some pains in the left side of my chest. I asked him, "I know this is rare, but could it be breast cancer?" I'm male, by the way. He felt around seriously, and then, with an absolutely straight face, he asked me, "Does the pain hurt worse when you're on your time of the month?" That was pretty much the end of my year of hypochondria. I had to go to the specialist urologist due to a pain in my ding-dong. My wife, who's awesome, accompanied me for support. The doc was at a teaching hospital, so he asked her if a couple of med students could observe the exam. I say, okay. My dignity was already at a new low anyway, so why not? I drop trow and the doc starts yanking and a-pullin' on mini-me. He takes some notes and then directs the 2 med students to cop a feel right where he did. I happen to look over at my wife, who's trying to stifle a smile while watching 3 dudes essentially whack me off. In conclusion, my insurance paid for the most awkward hand action in the history of time, while my wife watched. Well, whatever floats your wife's boat, I guess. Nothing like a mass audience for an inspection of one's manhood. On to the next story. This actually occurred shortly after I was born, and we refer to it as the green pea incident. My brother, 2 years old, was moving to solid foods and absolutely loved peas. Mushed, boiled, fried, or in things, he loved them. One day, my mum noticed that my brother wasn't going to the washroom. No big deal, she thought, it's been a day. 2 days later, nothing's coming out. He kept eating and eating like the happy little fat toddler that he was, eating all amounts of peas. My parents scheduled a day off work and took him to the doctor together. The doctor, of course, says that he must be constipated. It happens to the best of us. At this point, it's been 4 days since the little brat has taken one. The doctor gives him a large dose of prescription-strength X-Lax and suggests that they should probably keep an eye on him for the next while. As he's talking to my parents about what they should do, my brother starts to relieve himself. Bright, neon green crap. He had eaten so many peas that the fiber had actually clogged him up, and now it was returning in force. The semi-liquidated crap started flying out faster and faster, like you see in those comedy movies. Eventually, it settled down to a light stream, but not before his crap mist had covered the entire wall next to the examination table. Neon green crap mist. All over the doctor's tools, his blood pressure stuff, and his posters. It ruined the cushions on the table, and stank to high heck. My parents never went back to that doctor again. In conclusion, neon green crap mist. I think after such a performance, you'd be obligated to give that doctor your business for the rest of your life. A friend of mine mistakenly called her gynecologist instead of her dentist to make an appointment, and started the call by admitting she was overdue for a cleaning. Ugh. When I was brought up from being under anesthesia after getting my wisdom teeth out and before my transportation back home arrived, I recovered enough to unplug my IV and various sensor doodads, and wandered into the waiting room asking for some oral action. The nurse promptly gathered me back into my room, and I recall complaining that someone might have said yes, and I deserve the right to know. I remember my girlfriend and doctor laughing at me in the recovery room. I thought I was being completely logical, and I still don't know what I was saying. This story makes me not want to know. My father was getting his prostate checked out by this pretty good-looking female urologist. She had to insert a catheter since my dad was having trouble peeing. Anyway, she removed the catheter once they're done, and my dad starts peeing all over the doctor's leg. She took it like a champ and told him, "If I don't get peed on at least once a day, my husband will suspect I'm ditching work to have an affair." I can't imagine her actually having an affair. "Quickly now, pee on my leg, he won't suspect a thing."
When I was newly pregnant with my daughter, I was at my OB's office for a pelvic exam. After I stirrup up, my doc is knuckle deep in me and says, "Oh, you'll be fine if you have a big baby. There's plenty of room in here." I'm sure she meant that I have a wide pelvic arch and would have no trouble with a normal, natural delivery, but what I heard was, "Wow, I see dozens of these every day, but you have a huge, gaping hoo-ha." Last time I went to the OB or gyn, the doctor, female, just shoved her fingers in me without any warning so she could check my ovaries. I'm used to having doctors that do my exams at least warn me a little before they just cram stuff up in there. But nope, not her. After that wonderful incident, she pulls off her gloves and goes, "Wow, you're extremely tight. If you ever have a child, I would never suggest you give birth that way." Didn't even understand that she'd alarmed me in my hoo-ha, so how the heck was it supposed to be relaxed in any way? I'm definitely finding a new OB-GYN this year. One day, I was visiting a new doctor and he asked me to remove my trousers. I obliged, knowing that he'd probably check me for a hernia and make sure I didn't have a third ball or something. I'd forgotten that the night before, I'd shaved off exactly 1/2 of my hair down there. As my brain started to panic and he begins fiddling around, the doctor looks up at me and says, "It's easy to start, but it's hard to finish, isn't it?" While cauterizing the hole during my vasectomy, my skin smoked more than it should have, set off the fire alarm, and I ended up with numerous people of numerous career choices in the room with my exposed nutsack. "You should have said your wang was the new pope." "Oh, I figured that was implied." Oh gosh, I wonder if you wanted to undo your vasectomy after that, whether you'd actually be able to. That sounds serious, yikes. When my wife was in the final stages of labor, it seemed to be taking forever. I slipped out of the birthing suite to get some fresh air and make a couple of phone calls. They made me turn off my cell inside. A nurse came running and said to me, "Quick, come back, it's all happening." And they rushed me into a room where I was confronted with a huge hairy hoo-ha, from which a beautifully bushy, dark-haired Mexican baby literally fired out of the birth canal like a rocket. I'm going, "What the frick?" when the doctor hands me scissors to cut the umbilical cord. Well, that was fun, I thought, as I discreetly slipped out of the room and into the next room where my wife was still hours away from producing. Doctors and balls, man. Back in college, I was showering one evening and noticed a lump on one of my testes, which wasn't there before. I immediately assumed the worst, as you probably should with a lump suddenly appearing on your body, and made an appearance with the school clinic the next day. I'd already said my goodbyes to the little guy, and I was ready to have him removed. "Sorry, dude, if you're a life-threatening illness, you're destroying this body and you have to go. Good luck, long live and prosper, etc." Now I'm older, and I wouldn't really give a frick if I went full mast during an exam. I'd be all like, "Hey, yeah, still got it, hey? Hey?" Being an unrepentant pervert in situations like that is one of the great parts of getting older, but that's not part of this story. Anyway, I didn't really want to get hard or generally go showing my wang to strangers, but I also didn't want to die. First doctor to examine me looked exactly like the doctor on Battlestar Galactica, old, grizzled, and handles way too many nuts to care about mine. "Why don't they turn up the gosh darn temperature?" he tells me as he grapples with a man purse as hard and shriveled as a walnut. I swear to God, he had me in one hand and was bracing himself against the exam table with his knee as he pulled. "I'm going to breathe on it if it doesn't loosen up soon," he told me. Mercifully, it released its iron grip on my balls just long enough to avoid the hot breath of an old man on my junk. Yep, that's a lump. Go get an ultrasound. Needless to say, okay, maybe not on the internet, no half-masts were popped during that day. So I went to get the ultrasound. I sat around in a waiting room full of expecting women, all looking at me like, "Why are you here?" Finally, the doctor, a 4-foot woman who was the spitting image of my best friend's mum, calls me into the exam room, where I am to disrobe, surrounded by framed posters of innocent babies, and my cancerous eggplant. If you've had or seen an ultrasound, you know that they put some KY jelly on the surface and apply a wand that is vibrating at a very high frequency. If you've had your friend's mum give you an ultrasound right on your member, you know that she also had to grapple with your slippery, walnut-hard, turn-down the AC sack, and kept slapping your manhood out of the way as it flopped around. Finally, I'm like, I'll just hold myself out of the way. Unfortunately, this doctor didn't have any sack experience, only on babies, she admitted, so she called in the pro, a 30-something ex-frat boy. "Hey, nice member, man," he said.
entering the sacred space where parents catch a first glimpse of their soon-to-be progeny.
Now, let's have a look at that sack. Okay, in a situation like this, you want to get your hands warmed up and cup them. You see? Yeah, that's how it's done. Okay, now you want to gently grasp the nut and just kind of work the wand over it like, oh hey dude, look, it's your right nut.
He turns the monitor so I can see it.
That is a perfectly healthy testes. It looks flawless. Okay, now you try.
Anyhow, they go back and forth, squeezing 2 full tubes of KY jelly onto my jewels. It kept making a farty noise when they squeezed it because they were just ham-fisting it, like some subhuman people do with tubes of toothpaste. It took them about 30 minutes of nut wandering to conclude the training session. Finally, they get around to the nut with the actual problem.
Oh yeah, that's it right there. Look at that. Oh yeah, that's definitely a cyst for sure.
I'm all thinking, a cyst? Oh my gosh, I didn't read about that. You will not find anything about cysts when searching what is this lump on my sack, and I thought I was going to die. The doctor is like,
you have a cyst, you can go.
And I was like,
do I need to do something about this?
His reply,
not unless you want some butthole mucking around with your scrotum for no reason.
It was a benign cyst that I still have. Nobody that isn't feeling my testes would know that it was there. Nothing to worry about. In conclusion,
not unless you want some butthole mucking around with your testes for no reason.
You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. When I was in the waiting room of the hospital for a broken toe, I saw a somewhat elderly man, think 50s or 60s, come up to the nurse's desk and cough quietly. She waved him off as a sign to tell him to wait a minute, and he started to pace nervously. He was able to catch a male nurse walking by and try to discreetly tell him he needed immediate medical attention. I was wondering why the guy was so antsy, and that's when I noticed it. The guy had a mixture of brown and red fluid leaking down the back of his thigh from his shorts. The male nurse asked him to speak up, and even though he was quiet, I heard him mutter,
"I've got a toy so far up my butt that I can't reach it, and I don't want the entire gosh darn hospital to know about it."
The male nurse seemed to hesitate a bit and motioned him to wait in an isolated room. In conclusion, older gentleman has a toy shoved too far up his butt and started leaking onto the floor. And that, kids, is why you always use flared bases.
Parents need to teach their kids these things.
I had a pay-the-bills type job as an administrator at a private hospital. We had an urgent referral come in for a testicular ultrasound, and the guy whose testes needed to be checked was quite a famous actor and was performing in a play in town, so the schedule for booking him in was really tough going. So I was skipping through the next 2 to 3 days of appointment calendars and looking for a free 10-minute slot or a before-lunch slot that was filled but likely to run short, so there'd be time to speed him in and out. He was on the phone while I was trying to book him in, and I got so self-conscious at the long silence, after explaining the normal waiting times and what I was doing, that I said, all cheery-like, "Don't worry, we'll squeeze your balls in here somewhere." I made sure not to be near the reception desk when he came in. "Okay, I for one would have appreciated your levity and attempt to lighten the mood, Mr. Hospital Administrator. I think this particular actor had no appreciation of comedic timing." So I used to always get pelinodal cysts when I was in high school. From between 13 to 18, I had it 5 times, which according to my doctor is a lot. These things used to hurt bad. I'd get them right above my tailbone and it would feel like the tailbone was broken. If I didn't get it dealt with right away, I wouldn't be able to walk from the pain. The last time I ever got one, it was horrible. It was Halloween and I was at my friend's house when I noticed it starting to hurt. I knew right away what it was. The next morning I had my mum take me to the doctor's office, but because it was a Saturday, my family doctor's office was closed, so we ended up going to a walk-in clinic. The doctor took a quick look at it and said it wasn't the problem and set me up for an x-ray. By the time the x-ray was over, it was hurting beyond anything I could imagine. It felt exactly like one of the cysts, but I trusted the doctor's word. Later that evening, the pain was so severe that I had to go to emergency. At the hospital, the doctor there took another quick look at it and told me it was nothing. He prescribed me some pain medication and sent me on my way. That night was horrible. I was terrified. I thought there was something severely wrong with me. I thought I'd cracked my tailbone after I fell over a balloon at my friend's house or something. On Monday, after a weekend of intense pain, I could finally go to see my family doctor. I remember the waiting room being filled with people. It hurt too much to sit, so I stood in the corner with my back bent weird because it hurt too much to stand up straight. All of a sudden, I felt instant relief, followed by a smell that was quite honestly the worst smell I'd ever smelled in my entire life, even to this day. It smelled like death. The people around me could smell it too. Everyone started coughing, but trying their best not to offend. I could feel my pants were completely wet with the pus from my cyst. When my name was called, I was so embarrassed. Everyone knew the smell was coming from me, and now they could see my drenched clothing. I mean, it was like I'd just dropped the top of my pants and the bottom of my shirt in water. That's how wet they were. The faces of the people were that of utter shock. They must have thought that I'd peed myself. Later in the office, the doctor took one step inside the room and said, "Ah, another cyst?" He knew just from the smell what it was. He took a look and said it was the biggest one he'd ever seen. He signed me up for surgery. Before, I'd just gotten little surgeries just for him to pop the cyst, not a surgeon removing the skin around the area so it would never return. And I've never had one since. On New Year's Eve 2001, I woke up with an unbearable pain in the left side of my abdomen. I couldn't move for over an hour. I was at home from my sophomore year of college, but none of my family was home. After about 3 hours of crying and doubled over in pain, I crawled across the house and called my mum at work. She took me to the ER where they did some various pressure tests and listening and decided it wasn't my appendix, so they did some x-rays. The only other person in the ER was an old lady that had a cut on her head, and she was trying to comfort me while my face was red and I was holding back tears. The doctor came in and looked at the lady and looked at me and whispered, "I don't know how to tell you this, but your colon is full of crap," the actual term he used. I screamed, "That's it? Get it out of me!" And he told me he could give me an enema, a suppository, or a salty drink. I took the drink and crapped for 8 hours straight. I was good enough to go to a party that night, but I still had the runs and didn't get drunk. I felt so much better. In conclusion, thought my appendix was rupturing, and the ER told me I was full of crap. After a rough night of praying to the porcelain goddess, also known as spewing my guts out, I discovered that most of the blood vessels in one eye had burst. The result was red where normally the eye is white, so I looked creepy as heck. The nephew told me I looked like Voldemort. Wife insisted I go to the doctor to get it checked out. So I did. I got a random lady doctor. She took one look at it and asked, "So, are you into any rough stuff in the bedroom?" To which I replied, no, not really." Her response, "Well, you should be careful with that choking stuff. It can be dangerous." I laughed nervously and the nurse kept staring at the floor and I proceeded to explain that I'd been vomiting all night. Even as I left, she said, "Well, just be more careful next time." Oh yes, and the best part, this was in Provo, Utah, 99% Mormon and apparently home of rough, strangling nights of passion. Was getting a physical a few years ago so I could play high school football. Usually the doctor feels around your abdomen and that's that. This time the doctor made me strip and made me cough. I hadn't had fun with myself in a few days, and that with the combination of a stranger's hands on my beans gave me a semi, which I tried to cover, which led to me to accidentally toot on him as I turned around. The doctor looked at me and said, "You can play football," and he just left. I was 10. I went to the ER with a ruptured appendix. They had trouble diagnosing my problem and sent me in for an enema. The doctor was doing his thing. I said, "You must be the least popular doctor in the hospital." "Well, yeah, I don't get many thank you cards, that's for sure." I recently had a sore throat, and when trying to get a good look at it in the mirror, I noticed these large pink spots all over the back of my tongue. I spent a week fretting over it, wondering what they were and why they weren't going away, until my mum got worried enough about them that she went with me to the doctor. Upon examining my throat and tongue, he pronounced that what I was seeing was my taste buds. I've never seen my doctor, who's an incredibly stoic man, smile so wide before. My family is never going to let me live it down. Went to the doctor when I was about 8 months pregnant. At that point in my pregnancy, I was very gassy, and if I tried to hold it in, it would get painful after a while. While I was sitting in the doctor's office, I felt like I had to pass wind. I held it in for a while, thinking that if I did do that, the doctor would be in at any moment. 15 minutes passed and nothing, so I decided to let it go. The tiniest little toot ever, but it stunk like something crawled up my butt and died. 30 seconds later, the doctor walked in and asked me what that smell was. That sounds like what happens to me in any given situation where I think I'm alone, and you have mine and presumably many listeners' sympathies. Had nasal polyps removed. When there are a crap ton of them, after the procedure there are several follow-ups to get minor stragglers, but mostly also to remove giant blood clots that have formed. My otolarynologist is busy digging and scraping and scooping, and some monster fricking aliens are being dragged out. I can see my nostrils expanding like I'm passing a chicken egg-sized baby out of them, and they schloop shut again. Anyway, he's grinding and yanking at this one, and it won't come loose. He rotates it a bit, gently places it in a tray and says nothing but leaves the room with a half smile. 3 minutes later, he comes back and tells us he had a silent freakout and had to wash up, because a giant bloody string of snot carried elasticity from the pull and slapped up against the length of his cheek like a cheap 25-cent toy from the bins at the front of a Kmart. Getting my very first pelvic exam. First, the doctor was nervous, so she dropped the speculum, getting it out of the package. Hands shaking and everything. Okay. I'm on the table, speculum inside of me, and doctor and the nurse are hanging around my lady bits. I'm trying to pretend that I'm not here when the doctor goes, are you on your time of the month? No. Why? Oh! In her nervousness, she'd been way too rough and made me bleed. Thanks, doc. Massive hemorrhoids. Went to the doctor and he had to stuff my butt back inside my butt. Had to lay on my side for 3 days. I was having a lump on my nuts checked. I described said lump to the doctor and he went about trying to locate it himself. I was lying down at this stage, staring at the ceiling. After about a minute of him fumbling, he admitted defeat and asked me to find it. So I sat up and started to jumble them around in my hands. I was hunched over and he wasn't more than a foot away, staring intently at my jewels when suddenly a gust of wind blew the door wide open. Just then a nurse walked past the door. That was awkward eye contact. What are some of the creepiest mental conditions you've ever encountered? A lot of people know about phantom limb syndrome, in which someone continues to feel as if their limb is still there after it's been amputated, often in great pain. Another interesting one that not many people know about, and is almost kind of an opposite, is body integrity identity disorder, which is when a person has extremely strong feelings that one or more of their limbs doesn't belong to them, despite being functional, and often they really want to amputate. From their descriptions, it seems that it's actually very psychologically painful. Sometimes to the point where they will self-amputate because no doctor is willing to amputate a healthy limb. I once read a short, fictional story where the narrator is talking about the terrifying, deformed growths on his hands and is frustrated that everyone is downplaying his worries and pretending he's normal. Eventually, by the end, he decides to deal with it himself, and he uses power tools to remove all 10 of the disgusting growths. This sounds slightly like what I experienced a lot going through puberty. I felt as though my member wasn't actually mine. I had thoughts constantly about wanting to try and get rid of it with a pair of gardening shears, but I could never actually build up the willpower to do it. I never felt actual physical pain from it, but I remember lying in bed at night in emotional and mental pain, trying to figure out why I was so uncomfortable with myself. Eventually, by the end of my sophomore year of high school, I was able to accept that even though it may seem like it isn't an actual part of me, in reality, my member was mine, no one else's, and that's how it had to be. This was only accomplished by losing my virginity. I've never heard of anything more psychologically incredible than a fugue state, when the mind can't deal with reality, so it just creates an entirely new world for itself to live in. Or you just need time to deal with Tuco. A friend of mine is suffering the Capgras delusion. We moved apart several years ago and hadn't been in touch very well. I know she had gone through some stressful times. I had a couple of phone calls with her where she was worried that her computer had been hacked, but she seemed reasonable. Then one day she called me and told me that her husband had been replaced with an imposter. She wanted me to fly to visit her so I could see him with my own eyes and confirm for her that it wasn't really him. Talking to her is simultaneously fascinating, unnerving, and heartbreaking. The worst part is, while she's clearly not correct in her beliefs, she is quite consistent in them, and they are utterly real in her mind. Imagine how freaking terrified you would be all the time if you were certain that the most important person in your life was a stranger with mysterious, nefarious motivations. Imagine going to bed every night next to someone you thought was out to get you. Imagine spending all day desperately trying to find your husband because he must be out there somewhere, right? Oh my gosh, imagine being the husband. I did talk to him for a while. He was unbelievably stressed out. He was doing everything he could for her. Meanwhile, she treated him like a stranger. That is a rough deal. In some ways, I can't think whether this or a terminal illness is worse for someone's family when it happens. I was in a psych ward for depression, and my roommate was terrifying. She was schizophrenic, depressed, and also probably just kind of weird. She punched herself in the face constantly while whispering to the voices in her head. She also used to sit in the multi-purpose TV room, TV, games, fridge, etc., on the floor and flicked the bean. Like, a lot. But she never stopped whispering to herself while she did it. I woke up to tinkle one night and she was just in her bed, staring blankly at me. She was moved to a long-term facility on my 3rd day there. Oh god, I had a similar experience with my roommate. He was this really big guy, very nice and well-mannered. He'd tell us and the doctors during group therapy about how his mother didn't care about him. He told sob stories like many people there did, and it was sad but not unusual. Then one day, one of the doctors mentioned something about a certain medication he was taking, and I recognized it as an antipsychotic. It turns out he was a paranoid schizophrenic, and it just terrified me when I put the pieces together. And then I overheard his mother sobbing as she left from a visit and his father trying to calm her down and reassure her that he doesn't know what he's saying, and it wasn't his fault. Reactive attachment disorder. I work at a group home for kids with this disorder, and it was creepy before I fully understood it. Children who've been severely mistreated or neglected early in life often have their ability to form healthy attachments to caregivers or anyone destroyed. Some of them would cling to me, call me mummy, beg to come home with me 30 seconds after I met them. Others would refuse to talk to anyone, hurt themselves and others, set fires and act out any chance they could. Sometimes they would improve only enough to be sent to foster homes, only to have their behavior come back worse once they were placed in an unstructured family setting. It's extremely tragic. I had, or have, I guess, this disorder. I've grown out of the destructive episodes and bullying, but I still don't really have any relationships with people outside of my work or family. It's scary to look back on it now because I could have wound up in adult prison, but I used to lay awake at night and think about how I could manipulate the staff at my group home into killing each other. They were like Iago-level schemes. I figured out who was screwing who already didn't like each other, etc. I was even worse in foster homes. I bullied other kids for money and stuff, ran away constantly, stole everything I could get away with. I stabbed an adult in the leg when I was 10 because he called me a craphead, which admittedly was accurate. I also tried to do the deed with all of my foster moms and pretty much every other adult woman in my life. There are so few reliable long-term studies on RAD. Existing research suggests kids do grow out of it to the point where they no longer fit the diagnostic criteria as adults, but it still impacts their relationships. This is one of the reasons I think it's wrong to even suggest a child has antisocial personality disorder before age 18. Once you have that label, it sticks, and if a kid thinks they're born bad, they're more likely to act that out. I'm really sorry for what happened to you. It's not your fault, it's a normal reaction to the abnormal situation you're put in. I spent some time in the group homes and foster care myself, and it's what caused me to study psychology and social work. You're already ahead of the game by being so self-aware, so please don't give up continuing to heal. Oh, I have one. Now, nobody's been diagnosed with this in 40-odd years or so, but it's still taught in most undergrad courses because it's a really good example of culture-specific disorder. It's called Wendigo psychosis, or Wendigo, Wetiko, or Wintico, and here's how it goes down. You're a young male in an Algonquin tribe. It's been a long, cold winter and your whole tribe is starving. You and your hunting partner have been out hunting for moose or deer or even a bear if you have to, but you've totally struck out. You're starving, he's starving, and you've seen the way he's starting to look at you over the fire at night. So you do what you have to do before he does. You kill him and eat him. You know what happens when you eat another man, but you're starving and it's cannibalize or die. So you eat him, and the Wendigo comes and possesses you, because the Wendigo possesses everyone who eats someone else. And now that the Wendigo has possessed you, you're hungrier than you were. Hungrier than you've ever been before. But the only thing you're hungry for is more people. So you go back to your tribe and one of two things happens. One, you tell someone and they attempt to cure you by having you eat melted bear fat until you vomit the heart of ice you now have because you're a Wendigo demon. 35% of reported cases were cured by this method. Or two, you don't tell anyone. You go back to your tribe and attempt to kill and eat a family member. You'll eventually be stopped and killed during your murderous and cannibalistic rampage, and your remaining families will burn your body and scatter the ashes to prevent the Wendigo from possessing them too. The other 65% of reported cases. In conclusion, Wendigo psychosis is when you think an Indian demon possesses you, and then you try to eat your family. Fatal familial insomnia is pretty freaking scary. Suddenly you just start not being able to fall asleep, and you're gone within 7 to 36 months. You gradually lose the ability, along with a number of other symptoms over time, until eventually, at the end of the last stage, you'll not have slept in a long time. You'll be hallucinating and suffering from dementia, and eventually, you'll die. Only 40 families, about 100 people, have the disorder. Also, if you have it, there's a good chance you'll have kids by its onset, making the disorder pass down even further. Scary stuff. Diseases caused by prions are really scary. Every one of them, and all fatal. This is one of the most fascinating things I've heard about, and a single gene is responsible. Split brain syndrome. Sometimes, as a means of treating severe seizures or epilepsy, surgeons will sever the corpus callosum, the connecting tissue between the two lobes of the brain. The good news is that future full-blown seizures are limited to one half of the brain, leaving the patient aware and able to take precautionary measures. The bad news is that thanks to the lateralization of function, there are essentially two minds in the skull that can each only react to certain forms of stimuli. Patients usually develop workarounds, though. The weirdest part is the occasional outcome of alien hand syndrome, in which one of the brains takes control of one hand and uses it independently. When questions are presented to the controlling hemisphere, the hand can write out its answers, which is sometimes in disagreement with the main brain and the patient's spoken answers. It's been a while since I've studied abnormal psych, so the details might be a little fuzzy. This sounds like something we would ridicule in the future, like we do with some of the medical practices of the Middle Ages. Nurse here. First patient who thought she was the devil scared the crap out of me. You eventually get so used to people who think they're the devil and become numb to all the weird crap they do. This seems like the opposite of the scenario of multiple people with messiah complexes being kept together. What a perverse and, of course, tragic situation. I live with a longtime friend who I'm convinced is developing or has developed disorganized schizophrenia over the past 3 years. It's not as crazy or mind-blowing as some of the other ones in this group of stories, but it is truly messing up his life and making it exceptionally hard for me to tolerate him on a daily basis. More bizarre than anything. In the past couple of months, especially, he's exhibited extremely antisocial and disorganized behavior. Everything from inappropriate emotional reactions to regular life events, to an inability to form complete sentences or thoughts in a conversation, to plain old just messing around with people by not making any sense, sometimes on purpose, and sometimes unknowingly. He used to be an extremely personable guy who could just approach anyone and make friends. Now he literally can't hold a conversation, but he still wants to be really approachable and personable, but doesn't realize that he actually creeps people out so much that they will passionately avoid talking to him again. The most frustrating thing that he does is basically attaches to me whenever I'm at home. He'll stand at my bedroom door and watch me do my homework, fold my laundry, clean my room, work on my computer, build Legos, etc. He will always be in the same room as I am unless I've shut my bedroom door. He mimics my actions, wakes up whenever I do, goes to sleep whenever I do, always wants to cook or clean wherever I am. I essentially have to find things that he can't or doesn't know how to do to get some freedom. It's mostly me because I've known him for way longer than my roommates, but when I'm not home, he does all of this to them as well. I think this all stems from his inability to make basic decisions, like when to eat or where to study, or when to leave in order to be on time for something. This extends to almost every aspect of his life. I've been seeing a counselor to consult with her about it, but it's basically impossible to know anything for sure, because she can't tell me any information about him or his visits. He started going as well. I don't know if he goes to them unless I ask him, and there's no telling when he'll forget about a session or just decide not to go to the doctor's evaluation. It's even more frustrating that his counselor keeps telling me that I shouldn't keep reminding him of these things or keeping tabs on him, because eventually I will be like a mother taking care of an infant child. My words, not hers, and she is right, but it is upsetting. Weirdest part, he's studying behavioral neuroscience. In conclusion, I've been friends with my roommate for over a decade. In the past 3 years, he's developed disorganized schizophrenia right in front of my eyes, and there's nothing I can do about it. He's echoing, repeating your behaviors and actions as a way to cope. Some will do it in conversations as well, latching onto a phrase of importance and repeating it. The rain is really bad today. Yeah, the rain is bad. It's a sign of cognitive impairment. Your story is sad. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I'm a psych major, so not a professional, but in my opinion it is catatonic schizophrenia. Those suffering from this type of schizophrenia, although in the DSM-V they're getting rid of the different types of schizophrenia and there'll just be one classification, will sometimes be unable to speak or move. My professor worked in a clinic while in school and told us of one patient who would suddenly lock up into extremely awkward positions and not move for extended periods of time.
This used to happen to a friend of mine. He passed away 3 years ago, and it was absolutely freaking terrifying. The first time it happened, we had no idea what to do, so we just called an ambulance.
I'm sorry to hear that. I can't imagine how it would feel to witness something like that and have no way of explaining it before a diagnosis. Another scary part of mental illness is that more often than not, those who are suffering from the condition, whether it's schizophrenia or something else, will oftentimes not even notice it themselves. I spent a week in a mental ward. I had depression and I'd told a cop I wanted to take my own life in a fit of rage. The hospital I was at was divided. One side was Group A, folks who needed treatment but were considered safe. Group B was the folks that had to be watched more closely. About 2 days after I was checked in, another woman had come in too. She was also placed in Group A and was placed as my roommate. At first she seemed nice and normal-ish, but after a few hours her stories were getting mixed up. I mean, she came in, found out I had a kid, and then said she had a daughter as well, who lived with her mother-in-law, or something. After dinner, the story was that her daughter had been lost after being brutally murdered by her father, and that the woman didn't even care. I voiced my concerns to the nurses, but I was just told to go to bed in the same room with this lady. It took a while for me to fall asleep that night because my sleep schedule was all sorts of messed up. I think I passed out around midnight. We were put to bed at 8 p.m. I'm not sure how long I was asleep for before I was woken up by my roommate strangling me. Now, we were placed in the last room at the end of the hall, far from the nurse's desk. Plus, I was being strangled, so I couldn't even yell for help. I thought I was going to die, but I'd fallen asleep with a book. So I bashed the book on my roommate's head and booked it out of the room. The nurses probably thought I was the super crazy one yelling at them. I'm not sure they would have believed me if it wasn't for the fact that I had hand marks around my neck. My roommate was transferred to the other side of the ward, locked up with a limited time out of her room. I never bothered to ask what her deal was. I don't want to know. I had a new roommate by the end of the day, a really nice older lady who was a lesbian. I told her about crazy roommate number 1, and we would just shoot the crap for hours at night until I was ready to pass out. What reason is there to have roommates in a psych ward? It sounds like you're asking for trouble. Yeah, I thought so too, but everyone on the safe side had a roommate. Only had X amounts of rooms. If the second roommate never came, I would have been alone. Only us 2 chicks on that side the whole time I was there. It must be because of the money, because my friend had to go to an institution when he was a teenager and was thinking of taking his own life, and they didn't even let him talk to his roommate. It sounded like prison and it made him more depressed. He also had a 9-year-old roommate who'd attacked his mom. They made the kids go around and say why they were there every day in the group therapy, so every day everyone was reminded about what that kid did. My friend's mom took him out after a week. The big difference with these things lie with whether or not it's a place where the patients are there voluntarily. When I was checking myself into the psych ward last year, depression, wanting to hurt myself, my doctors told me not to go to the hospital that has non-voluntaries. That's where you're going to see the horrifying roommate stuff. Unfortunately, I would say a good number of people don't have a choice though. The scariest thing I know of is locked-in syndrome, where you're completely awake but unable to move. People assume you're a comatose vegetable when you're really just paralyzed for decades.
Not the same thing, but similar. My mom was having open-heart surgery when the anesthesia wore off, though she was still paralyzed, so she could feel everything. Apparently it didn't hurt too much, but was scary as frick. Happened 2 or 3 times, I think.
There's an amazing film about this condition. It's called The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. A true story about Jean-Dominique Bauby, who was the editor-in-chief of Elle magazine until he suffered a stroke that led to locked-in syndrome. The film was adapted from a book that he wrote using only one eyelid to communicate. That's a grim fate to be sure, although that's the norm in this story grouping. Your psych evaluations are just as important as your medical checkups, folks. I'm a paranoid schizophrenic. I don't believe there's anything scarier on the planet than an episode. Nothing is more terrifying than being betrayed by your own mind. The things you hear and see, it's awful. I'm a psychology major, but this story doesn't have to do with my schooling. To put myself through school, I worked as a receptionist at a swimming pool, and Thursday is the day when individuals with disabilities and mental disorders come to the pool with their workers. I was on the other side of the counter helping the individuals into the changing rooms, and one of the clients grabbed my hair and started screaming at me that it was too beautiful and she needed to take it. One of the single most upsetting moments of my life, because after her worker managed to get her to relinquish my hair, she just continued to scream wordlessly until I was no longer in her sight. Wife is a psychologist. She says shared delusional disorder. Woman and her mother had paranoid delusions about mum's ex-husband and were convinced he was stalking them and breaking into their house. The ex had gotten the woman's son, aged 6, a modeling contract, and they thought that every picture of a kid in a magazine was him. The images that didn't look like him, they claimed were photoshopped. This was so weird and creepy since two people shared the same delusions. Psychologist here, works specifically with kids with degenerative or developmental disorders, and in my day I have seen some crap. There is nothing creepier than something called happy puppet syndrome, aka angel man syndrome. It's a disease most commonly found in children where they always have a happy effect, even when they're upset, and to top it all off, their motor skills are affected in such a way that their limbs move as if they're on marionette strings. There's a condition where people believe that their life is like the Truman Show, and that nothing in their life is real. I think that's creepy because there's no way to convince them that they're not part of a TV show. Yeah, this happened with my ex-boyfriend. Not exactly that it was a TV show, but still thought everyone in the entire world was watching him. Really scary stuff. Happened to me on a bad substance trip. Didn't help that I blacked out and came to in the backseat of my car at sunset at the beach, not another soul in sight. For about 20 minutes, I thought I broke the illusion and now I was going to live forever in an empty simulation. Friends weren't answering my calls or anything. Way messed up. When I was younger, I was a pretty unstable kid, which led to multiple stays in a youth psych ward. One of the times I was in, we got a boy who looked like a 14-year-old fatter, paler, creepier Jack White. So we find out that he threatened to kill and eat his school principal, which even to a bunch of mentally ill teens was psycho as frick. I felt bad for him because obviously he was messed up in the head, way more than us at least. But he would say all of these awkward things trying to be funny that ended up sounding like serial killer quotes like, "Do you ever wonder what it feels like to be dead or eat someone?" Which especially to the girls was freaky as F. So after my roommate gets out, I hear that this Hannibal Lecter wannabe is moving into my room. It's weird, but I just brush it off. I was 250 pounds and 5'10", and he was just him. And every once in a while when he made a messed up joke, they would just pull him aside and tell him to chill out. But one day I don't see him, and one of the doctors calls me in. They tell me he's in his own room in solitary now, and they pull out his notebooks and it's filled with drawings of me while I sleep. Fantasy drawings of him doing the deed with me, killing me, eating me, and pages of ramblings on how he would F me or how I would taste. It's literally the entire notebook front to back filled with these drawings and writings. I'm so petrified that I don't talk or leave my room for days. He apparently got sent to a long-term center far away, but I ended up staying even longer since they thought I would try to self-delete over that. But that's the story. Never saw or heard from him again. Still think about it all the time. It's hard to sleep around other people anymore. I was once in a party and joined this group of people, of which I knew just one person. He introduced me to the others one by one, and when I arrived at the last one, Noah, I shook his hand and petted his shoulder. He grabbed my arm and flipped it around and almost snapped it. Needless to say, it was the most awkward situation in my life, and even thinking about it makes me grind my teeth. I learned that Noah had been in Afghanistan and he freaked out when something or someone touched him from his back. It might have been post-traumatic stress disorder, or he was just hypervigilant. Don't forget that hypervigilance is necessary to keep one alive in conflict. The saddest thing is the high number of servicemen who are returning from war with these sort of mental problems. At least now they recognize PTSD as a real problem, so better debriefing can occur when servicemen return, or early intervention support can be provided, unlike the Vietnam vets who had to suffer in silence for decades. But unfortunately, the soldiers still aren't receiving the level of help that they need to deal with these sorts of issues. Gentlemen, what are some telltale signs that a woman is creepy? If she doesn't ask me many questions or doesn't seem interested in my life but still manages to be clingy. AKA, she just wants a boy, doesn't care who. Or just wants self-validation and doesn't care where from. When she puts a phone in your trunk on top of your spare tire to track you via GPS. I don't use my trunk. She knew that. She hooked it up to the 12-volt charger in my trunk and put a tracking app on the additional line she bought. I only discovered it when I had a blowout and had to use it. When I questioned her about it, she said she had trust issues. But good news! Every time I told her I was somewhere, I was at that place. We broke up after that. The story had a happy ending for me. It was a toxic relationship, but my next relationship was with the woman who would become my wife. We'll be celebrating our 8th wedding anniversary in a couple of months. I sometimes wish I'd been able to help my ex. She had quite a few good qualities, but the suspicion, insecurity, and attempts to control me were too much for me to deal with at the time. It sucks when you see what someone could become, but you know they probably never will. Girlfriend was practicing her signature and asked if she could see mine. Innocent enough, right? I rattle off a few beautiful Johnny Hancocks on a napkin and beyond admiring my own handiwork, didn't think of it further. Fast forward a week and she says, "Check out my new tattoo." And sure enough, it's my signature. First name only, on her right or wrong hip. Yikes. Fast forward to her solo European trip, turns out she cheated on me with a guy with the same first name. I bet he was scared. This girl I met on Tinder had me take her out to a restaurant and then switched tables with her friend. They'd been on blind dates and decided to switch. Her friend was not as attractive and I was very uncomfortable. After ordering my food, I went to the bathroom for 10 minutes to contemplate my exit strategy. When I got back, they'd both left. The other guy asked if he could sit with me, so we had dinner and he ate his date's enchiladas. It was actually kind of fun after they left. This turned out way nicer than expected. And? You and that guy fell in love over those enchiladas and have been married for 20 years now? No, we both ate and I fronted the tab because it was $26 and I was in a good mood. I saw him on campus about a year later and kind of smiled in memory. Commiseration meals. There is something so very wholesome about the result of this, even if it was just an hour's companionship instead of a lifelong friendship. My ex would freak out and throw things and scream at me. And that's not the disturbing thing. She would freaking forget about it and hit reset and act like it didn't happen the next day. Over and over. I started filming her episodes to prove to myself that I wasn't going crazy. That's called gaslighting. It's a form of emotional abuse, and I most often see people who are very, very insecure deep down use it. My dad did this to me and my siblings as we were growing up. He would have these big blow-ups at us and shout at us to leave the house, tell us we're worthless, what have you. The next day he'd be offering to make us lunch before we left for our work shift. If we, being vulnerable teenagers with bruised feelings, would turn down the offer, he'd get mad again. Not super aggressive necessarily. I'd leave for work early before letting it get that far, but he'd complain to our mum that we are ungrateful and mean to him because we refused his gracious offer. Happy news, my dad actually started to get real help about 3 months ago. This behavior was ongoing for the last 15 years, but for the last 2 months, I've been getting updates saying he's doing better. When after 2 days she tells you that she loves you, and also proceeds to mention that she loves your green eyes so much that if we ever broke up, she would steal them while you sleep and keep them in a jar in her room. When she constantly tells you how everybody in her life is out to get her, and nothing is her fault. I've been friends with her for about 15 years, and at times it feels like being a victim is her entire identity. At work, all of her bosses hate her for no reason, or because she's a woman, even though it seems to follow her from job to job, and she has many female bosses with whom this problem still exists. Her group of friends are completely different every 1.5 years or so, because she inevitably has a falling out and it's always their fault. In relationships, she behaves as if her boyfriend du jour is the only redeeming light in a world of evil, rotten people, until they break up, at which point he's always portrayed as a bullying monster and a shining example of what pigs all men are, in very public tirades on every social media page she has. Constant subtweets 24/7, but more so after a breakup. Now, I don't doubt that she's been hurt in relationships before. She, nor anybody else, doesn't deserve that. But I do have a hard time believing that every single man she's ever dated is a psychopath, every single boss she's ever had has been mistaken and out to get her, and every single best friend is actually a two-faced B-word. At some point, the common factor in all these situations is her. I don't mean to minimize the bad relationships she might have had. They are real issues, and people claiming abuse should be believed and should be taken seriously. After all these years and all these instances of problems, I do have a hard time believing her specifically, though. If the whole world smells like crap, check your shoes. If you meet a butthole in the morning, you met a butthole. If you meet buttholes all day long every day, you're the butthole. Anyone who just posts stuff about their exes on social media is someone to stay away from. It just screams, I'm an attention seeker and I'm unable to be mature about breakups. Bonus points if none of the problems in the relationship were apparently their fault. She'll joke about having kids before you're even in a serious relationship. I went on a couple of dates with this one girl who had mentioned how much she wanted kids. Nothing unusual, pretty common actually. I'm looking forward to being a dad one day. Then she started sending me those weird things where you put two people's pictures together and see what their kids would look like. One time would be quirky, but she sent me a different one every morning for a week. Broke it off when I realized I hadn't even given her a picture of myself. Oh, that last sentence was like a horror movie, oh my god. Met this girl in church group in middle school. We got to know each other because of the group, but didn't really become friends or anything. Stopped going when I went to high school and never really talked to her for 3 years. Then she commented on a Facebook status I had and we got to chatting and I agreed to hang out the next weekend. I asked if we should invite other people in our church group since I hadn't seen any of them in a while and she said no. I thought this was because she liked me and wanted to hang out with me, so I was flattered. I kept talking to her throughout the day. The next morning I woke up at around 10 a.m. to about 7 or 8 missed calls, 2 voice messages and countless text messages from her. I was pretty creeped out by then. The nail in the coffin was one of the messages I got was from an old friend from the church group asking me if I talked to that girl. I was confused how my friend knew I'd talked to this girl before. Turns out the girl had started messaging my friends, asking when I wake up in the morning and why I hadn't messaged her back.
That went from, oh yeah, going on a date, to nope, overnight.
I had this. I was excited to go on a first date with a cute girl. Night before the date, everything is good. Come morning, I get a text from her saying she's a little nervous because she just got out of a fairly serious relationship. I replied saying, yeah, that's fair, how recent was it? I'm wondering if this is like last week, a few months ago, just trying to understand her position. She flips a switch and starts swearing at me and acting like I was accusing her of something. Very odd. She got very defensive. I told her not to worry about the date, maybe not the best timing. She says some snide, yeah, fine. And that really was that. Very strange. Plot twist. The relationship was to be ended the next day after you proved stable enough a stepping stone. Hopefully these were all teenage problems rather than personality problems. Let's hope that the girl in the first story grew out of it. I once responded to a flatmate ad, but the criteria was single male 30-ish year old. Turns out she wasn't looking for a flatmate, she was looking for a husband. I was always clear that she would just be a flatmate to me. The weird things included getting upset when I didn't make her aware of when I was coming home or just coming home late. She slept in a pile of laundry, but the rest of the house was immaculate. I brought a girl home once, and she moved from the lounge to her bedroom beside mine so she could hear what was going on. Things got super weird after a lot of daytime texting with nonsense questions and flat meetings. Then outright banning my friends. Then an extreme amount of verbal abuse, and when I moved out, she'd just come up to me and yell stuff like, "You're such a fricking loser." Basically, I'd started seeing another girl and she went over the edge. I always refrained from reacting and just got the frick out. For those of you wondering, no, I never slept with her and the boundaries were always super clear from the start. Specifying age and gender and relationship status is pretty common for a share house, and I've spent 10 years traveling and working in different countries and see that requirement all the time. This happened in Melbourne, Australia, and I'd just moved to there, and I was trying to get out of a backpacker hostel quickly. There weren't many red flags on the ad, or our first meeting, but a lot was hidden from me before I moved in. The laundry pile was always on her bed. I have no idea if it was clean or not, but it was always there every day. Some of you are saying that's not weird, but I haven't seen that before or after. She wasn't ugly, but she wasn't anywhere near hot enough for me to take the risk. When I say she moved from the lounge to the bedroom, I mean she was watching TV in the lounge, we came in and said hello, went to my bedroom moments later, and we could hear her in there reading a book. We never had any conflict up until I gave her notice about moving out and she asked if it was her. It was, but I made up some crap about being new to the area and wanting to be somewhere more social, closer to the nightlife, etc. The girl I'd started seeing was mega hot, way out of my league, and the awkwardness of bringing her to my flat surely ended that relationship prematurely. I could also tell she was in the next room because people who are alive and nearby make normal human noises. Also, sadly, I got instantly friend-zoned by the hot girl, so we were just hanging out. It was easy to hear noise from the next room, not sure why that confused people. I was always super nervous around the hot girl, I don't know why. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Here are some of my red flags. She dyes her hair every color of the rainbow just to see how you'll react. Tells your family to back off because you're hers. Cheats with her male roommate while you run out to the car to grab a red box. Gives you herpes. F you, Rachel. Go eat a bag of members. An inability to apologize for anything ever. Punishing you with a silent treatment for doing something you had no idea would be offensive to them. Having expectations of you, and then they don't try to meet them themselves. I would never stand that in a relationship, but it happened to me with work colleagues. They never understood why I don't mind that they're ghosting me, instead of annoying me or freaking out at me. Some nice peace and quiet for a change. In high school, there was a girl who liked me. She ended up carving my name into her foot. Soulmate.
She probably wanted a friend in you.
No, I think she wanted the friend in her. Asking for your passwords, your phone, email, Facebook, etc. as a sign of trust. Nope, I have nothing to hide. However, when you think you need to have that information, it shows you already don't trust me. And anyone who asks and then says they won't use it is lying. They may not use it that day or even soon, but they will use it at some point, because the same suspicion that led to them asking for it will lead them to use it. Oh, and I'm not talking about something like your Netflix or Amazon Prime password, which can just be convenient. Heck, I have some of my friends' Netflix passwords. We're talking about phone, email, and social media passwords specifically. Secondly, if you want to offer it, more power to you. But someone shouldn't ask for that is my thought, especially not as a way to prove that you aren't cheating. And 3, like most things, marriage changes stuff. I still think it's a bit much to have all of someone's passwords and have access to everything they ever do or people say to them, but I understand it a bit more in that situation. I had a girlfriend who yelled at me for spending $9,000 on my mountain bike instead of her. I race professionally and I took her out to dinner at least 3 times a week and got her gifts all the time. Plus, we got to travel the world thanks to sponsors. But the one purchase for myself was too selfish. The bike was an Aurum HSP2 with box components, in case you're wondering.
This is literally my roommate's girlfriend. He takes her out to dinner 3 times a week, travels 50 miles every week back and forth to visit her at school, buys her jewelry and nice things, etc. Yet the one time he couldn't make it to her school for a visit, she called him to scold him for his selfishness and then broke up with him via text. The saddest part is that he drove all the way to her school that night to talk to her about it, and she fell asleep before he arrived, so he had to sleep in a parking lot in his car overnight. Until she woke up. Somehow they're still together. Makes me mad because he deserves so much better.
You should remind these people of the sunk cost fallacy. Just because you've invested time and money into someone, it doesn't mean you should continue with them. Make your decision based on what you know now. Oh god, I'd never thought to use sunk cost fallacy in the context of a relationship, but now you mention it, it might be the main reason so many terrible relationships go on for as long as they do. Food for thought, people. Tighty-whities stapled to her wall as conquests. I've seen it, it's out there. Extra points for rubbers instead of underwear.
Historic documentation.
Talks about all the health ailments she thinks or is convinced she has, and then continues to consume foods which she claims she's extremely allergic or intolerant to that are wreaking havoc on her health. And holy frick, as I was typing this, a text from her came in telling me about some random health ailment. When she goes through your drawers when you're sleeping. Oh, my cat used to do that. I used to always wake up to socks all over my bedroom and have no idea why, until one time I woke up in the middle of the night to see my cat systematically taking socks out of my sock drawer and then discarding them somewhere else. I think you should start seeing a different cat. This one sounds really toxic. Outright refusing to believe that a guy might not be into her advances. I've seen a woman stare in bewilderment at her boyfriend after he had to repeatedly remove her hand from his groin because she couldn't comprehend that he didn't feel like getting felt up in a public area. I've also had a woman, middle-aged, throw a tantrum because I wouldn't buy her a drink when I, 22 at the time, was at a bar, while I was with my parents and some visiting family members. I worked at a resort hotel as a younger man. Older women would legit put their hands wherever they wanted on the staff and think it was hilarious, but if you got upset or didn't gracefully remove your body from their grasp, they would get teed off. Like, how dare you seem ungrateful after I did you the favor of massaging your eggplant while you tried to pour coffee for the table? What the frick is it with people who think they have the right to the bodies of waitstaff? I've seen this way too many times against both genders. It's messed up. I had to leave a party after my grad school graduation because this girl who I couldn't stand wouldn't stop trying to stick her tongue in my mouth. Like, I'd push her away and go to a different part of the bar, and she'd follow me and try to make out with me. After several minutes of me telling her to F off, I just had to leave. 60,000 texts will do it. Not 65,000? What about 69,420 texts? Huh, nice. A girl I befriended in college seemed pretty cool at first, but I quickly learned she had huge attention-seeking problems. I took her to a party where she was all over me.
arm in arm, holding my hand everywhere we went. I wasn't allowed to be alone. When I was talking to another pair at the party, a couple at that, she kicked it up a notch, trying to kiss and be cuddly and whatnot. I was fine with it at the time because, hey, she's nice, she's cute, a little intense, but I could be misreading it. But I certainly was into her. It was kinda nice being the target of someone else's affection like this. After the party, I walked her back to the dorm and she informatively told me not to try anything because she had a boyfriend. Bonus! Same girl a few weeks later told me that if I'd really wanted to sleep with her, I shouldn't have told her I was straight, because she can't help but turn men. A long time ago in the 90s, I was set up on a blind date. The girl knew way too much about me. She knew my brother's names, where I grew up, and other personal stuff you'd have to dig a little to find out about. This was pre-Facebook, and back in the 90s, she would have had to ask people who actually knew me to find out. She was just a friend of a friend of a friend kind of thing, so I noped out of that one pretty quick. Later, I asked the people who'd set me up on the date what the heck, etc., and it turns out the girl had this super long crush on me and was reportedly devastated that I wasn't into her. Luckily, I steered clear of that possible Stephen King novel scenario.
It sounds like she should have really just played it cool and asked you about those things on the date.
Yeah, those are all really reasonable questions to ask about a person when you're going on a blind date with them. Save for the sibling's name thing. She should have brought that up in a more natural context. You know, I have to ask the question, is it any better if this person is concealing their obsession and asking a list of pre-prepared questions they already knew the answers to and saving the crazy obsessive reveal for later? I at least appreciate how upfront they were about it. I dated a girl in university that turned out to be severely mentally ill, and we dated for many years as she turned me into a shadow of myself, devoid of self-esteem, friends, and any sense of self. Heed my words or be doomed. She wouldn't like it if I went anywhere without her, or did anything without letting her know. I don't know if it was jealousy or what, but it really angered her, and if I ever went anywhere without her, I'd spend most of my time chatting with her on my phone and trying to calm her down. She would contact me randomly throughout the day to tell me she felt terrible and I had to go and be with her. It didn't matter what I was doing. Usually I was at class or at university or trying to hang out with my friends. It was expected of me to speak very lovingly and tell her I'd be over right away. Even if I went over right away, she would get mad that I didn't sound very happy about it, then fight about that. Or if I said I couldn't do it, she'd lose it at that too. You can't imagine how badly this affected my academic and social life. Even if we were together, I couldn't do stuff that wasn't about her. Doodling in a sketchbook while watching a movie? She'd flip out. Mess around on my guitar while we're lying around in my room chatting? Fury. She hated all women who dressed freely. Girl in shorts? Whore. Girl in miniskirt? Horrible slag. What was weird was that she was a hippie liberal girl with progressive parents, but when it came to other women being in touch with themselves, it was somehow terrible. Didn't have a lot of female friends in general, and if my housemates ever brought girls over to our house, she'd get really insecure. Would have random episodes due to her bipolar, causing her to scream at me, throw crap at me, drive extremely erratically, and just generally treat me like garbage. I was basically linked to her 24/7, either physically or by phone, and if we ever got into any kind of argument, I couldn't just walk away and try to cool off. That would drive her nuts and she would panic even more and pursue me. I could go on about her and her behavior, but these were at least things that were there from pretty much the start. Other things revealed themselves over time. In the end, she broke up with me, which I couldn't believe. At first I was angry with her, but very quickly that anger turned to me. When I think back to how long I stayed with her and how badly she treated me, I feel such hatred for myself for doing that to myself. I was weak. She was broken, but she made me feel like I mattered sometimes, and that was enough for far too long. A girl wanted to date me, and she told me how she climbed in her ex's second-story window to argue with him. No thanks. When they know more about your errands than what you told her. Extra creepy point if she becomes angry when you deviate from your initial daily plans. Extra creepy points if she starts angrily texting you when you change your plans as your day is unfolding. When she's a colleague from work and she turns up at the gym coincidentally 5 minutes after you've arrived, and she's in a low-cut top and starts laughing and touching your arms and bending over and just generally being weird. Especially when she knows that you have a wife and kids and this 45-minute session is the only peace you get 3 times a week. The second date is to a federal prison to visit her son that's doing life for murder.
later saying the phone she snuck in her hoo-ha made her too sore to do the deed that night. What's the most socially accepted form of self-destruction?
Self-hatred and negative self-talk.
Indeed, sustaining that negative voice in your head all day really breaks down your self-worth and self-esteem. We're all flawed in many little and different ways. Try to be kind to yourself and others, if only for little things. I've been trying to do that for a while now, and it helps, and others will react more positively towards you, as well as helping you get a bit more positive bit by bit. I mean, yeah, but it allows me to go harder in the gym.
I once told my coach at the gym I'm not motivated by hearing "you can do it." I need some old school drill sergeant motivation screaming how worthless I am because I can't get the weight up.
Sleep deprivation. Not many adults brag about the amount of alcohol they drink. At one point, that just isn't acceptable anymore. But so many can brag about sleeping less than the recommended hours. Like it's an achievement to be able to function on too little sleep. No, you're harming yourself, inducing stress to your body.
I have genuine sympathy for people who aren't doing that by choice, though.
But if I know they're doing it by choice and trying to brag about only getting 2 hours of sleep a night, I'll just start bragging about how much sleep I'm getting.
Slept 9 hours last night and then I had a nap afterwards. I feel great.
Exactly this. I suffered 10 years of severe sleep disorders, and to an extent I still do. Not so quirky anymore when you black out on buses, ache during the walk to work, see pink elephants floating down the lecture room, forget last year's entire vacation, lose relationships, or fail class, because your unconscious self breaks alarm clocks without you even knowing. You don't realize how critical your sleep is to daily function until you've been deprived of it for the better part of a decade.
Just get an alarm clock. B-word, by the time I get to sleep, an alarm clock isn't waking me. I once woke hours and hours after my alarm went off. It was still going off, 3 feet from my face, like a freaking siren, just deafeningly loud. Sleep disorder doesn't give a frick.
Yeah, I have to get someone to wake me up normally these days if I have to be up early. Suffering from depression and anxiety, with my antidepressants making me extra tired, and I've been a lifelong vivid dreamer, again, made worse by meds. I can regularly wake up with all of my alarms still going a foot from my head. Even weirder, I can wake up, turn off my alarms, fall back to sleep, and have absolutely no memory of doing it. A couple of times I've actually sent messages or written notes on a post-it note during the night and fallen back asleep. I've literally hallucinated when waking up multiple times. Waking up in the morning, I regularly dream or hallucinate university emails being sent to me, and read emails and reply to messages that don't exist, or just completely make up conversations with people, because I hallucinated and they said something else. At the same time as all of this, I can suffer from insomnia. I basically fall asleep easily when I shouldn't, but only sleeping tablets are helping me to sleep at night right now. People get so mad at me for being late or sleeping through alarms, and I just can't help it. It's not me being lazy. It's not me not caring. I genuinely can't control when I wake up, and my alarm isn't guaranteed to wake me up every time. I didn't wake up and decide to go back to sleep. I just sleep through everything. I'm just not, and likely never will be, someone who can easily wake up in the mornings. Oh gosh, I'm counting my lucky stars that I'm a big sleepy sheepdog of a person who can and will drop asleep anywhere and everywhere and sleep like a log, provided there isn't any special stress going on in my life. Overworking. It's lionized and not just socially accepted. Somehow, 12 or more hours a day in a cubicle has become a badge of honor. Working insane hours takes priority over family and health, at least until you drop dead. In Japan, older, burnt-out salarymen were sidelined to sit in a nicer office and not expected to do anything much but stare out of the window. In some ways, that seems worse than dropping dead.
Give me a nice office, no expectation to complete any task, a computer with internet, and I will mindlessly scroll through Reddit the whole way to retirement.
You'd think. I had this situation, and at first it was great, but after a year I'd come to the end of the internet and was losing my mind. I think if you were working from home it would be one thing, but having to trudge to the office every day to do nothing of value got old really quickly. I finally ended up quitting for a job where I actually get to do something. Get injured on the job in the US. As long as it clearly wasn't your fault, they can't fire you. But they will put you in a room to either do nothing at all or paperwork, and because many places have a policy of no cell phone use, you'll wish you were let go or actually died in the accident.
Alcohol.
Alcohol is the only self-harm that people look at you strangely for not participating in.
And they'll even bully you about it.
Yep, I've never smoked, toked, drank, or did any substances in my life, and it was only ever drinkers that got upset about that at all. Why not? Are you sick? Are you pregnant? What's wrong? On medication? Like, shut the frick up for frick's sake, and let me drink my Diet Coke in peace.
Yeah, I'm on 103 days of quitting alcohol, and the main reason I don't want to tell people is because I'm afraid they'll think something horrible happened. In reality, I'm just getting too old and busy for drinking and hangovers to fit into my life.
I've always been so mind-blown at how alcohol is treated in our society, and the bias with alcohol versus other substances. If someone mentions smoking or using other substances, they're usually looked at as low-lives or addicts, and others judge them and act extremely concerned with their health and safety, and say how bad it is to do those things. And yet, those same people are always the ones who are going out to the bar every night, can't de-stress without having a drink, and always need to be drinking to have a good time. And they don't see anything wrong with their behavior. The amount I've learned in my 20s about how much alcohol truly affects your body is insane to me. Why do we normalize blacking out? You're pretty much overdosing on alcohol. Why do we normalize terrible hangovers? I just don't understand it. Why can people drink until they pass out in a bush and laugh about being blackout, and go to work the next day and never be tested for anything? But someone who smokes green herb on occasion is always at risk of failing a substance test and losing their job. It's crazy. Doom scrolling. Huh? Thanks, agreed. And that's enough Reddit for now. Control F4.
Ha! I see what you did there. You're still on Reddit, since Alt F4 is to force close. Sneaky, sneaky.
Alcohol, by a long shot, to the point where people who don't drink are considered sanctimonious outliers.
This is true. I don't drink and never have done. I'm 27, and honestly, the worst people for criticizing or becoming defensive were my parents' generation. People my age were pretty generally good about it, especially at uni, which really surprised me. But I'm still considered unusual, and many people my age do alcohol-based activities like clubbing, or bottomless brunches or bars, etc. I do think attitudes are changing, though.
I've been sober for more than 3 years, and my friends still routinely ask me, "You still not drinking?" Despite knowing that I quit because I had a problem. It's bonkers. I don't have a problem with anyone who drinks, so please don't have a problem with me not drinking. Besides, now you've got a sober driver and someone to pay attention to your kids when you get completely crap-faced at the beach.
Wondering if you're ugly.
The worst part is that some of the people who think about it the most are completely normal and not ugly, and some of them are even attractive. Maybe self-esteem issues, sadly. I can see how that's addictive. I just scroll through looking at pictures and reading comments for a good hour or so. At first I thought it was just hot women fishing for compliments, and there are some in there for sure. But reading the comments, there's a lot of people that genuinely believe they're ugly when they really aren't. It's quite sad. Mathletes. It's social suicide.
She doesn't even go here. That's so fetch. Stop trying to make fetch happen. It's not going to happen.
People have said great answers like overworking, lack of sleep, and perfectionism, but I'd like to add a more niche one: digital self-harm. Looking up things that horrify and scare you, or making you feel insecure, such as an eating disorder encouragement, or incel pages that tell you deserve pain, is a form of self-harm. I've noticed whenever I'm not doing well, I end up going down research rabbit holes about disease, war, horrible historical events, gore, and all that crap. It's interesting, and I justify it because it's interesting, but honestly, it just makes me feel more horrible. Self-harm isn't just physical. Sometimes if you have anxiety or depression, your mind wants something that makes you feel worse because it's trying to seek out a reason why you feel so bad. It's true, once I was feeling like crap, full on having anxiety attacks, and ended up looking up methods of taking my life online. Not to try those methods, just to horrify myself out of my mental state. 10 out of 10 would not recommend. It's such a strange urge. It made so much sense once I realized it was simply my head trying to find a reason I felt so bad, because it was distressing that the reason was simply mental illness.
A lack of sleep.
Overeating.
Overeating and eating an unhealthy diet. It's like the #1 public health problem in America. And yet I see so many stories about over-exercising here instead. There are at least 5 stories further on that are some form of exercising. How is obesity or overeating not higher on the list? Well, maybe the fact that it's not recognized here means that it fits the title. Working night shift. Underrated answer. I worked the night shift for 2 years. I barely saw my wife or my friends or my family. It was hard to function. Things like going to the dentist or the bank became a huge hassle. The crazy swing of getting back on your day schedule for your days off so you can see people, then back to overnights, puts so much stress on your body. I'm a night owl and I function best after midnight. I can relate with your problems for sure.
This is the comment I was looking for. Although nights are a lot better to work as they're quiet and you get a lot of money. They are horrible for your mental and physical health though. You barely sleep, barely see your friends and family. You have to constantly cancel things as you're physically not able to go as you're drained away.
I'm on year 20 of nights, and no way I could get away with half the crap I do on day shift.
Yep, even on my freelancer schedule, I push myself so hard to get all of my work done on a regular 9-to-5 schedule, because I remember what I turned into as a guy who stayed up all night working, and I don't want to go there again, thank you. Not leaving a marriage due to social stigmas surrounding divorce or the otherwise religious implications holding you there. Stop delaying happiness due to what other people's expectations of a good person are. You're not exercising duty by staying in a toxic relationship, you're self-harming. On that tack, there's also getting married. People need to know that it's okay to be alone and not lonely.
I wish more people understood this. I haven't been in a relationship in 7 years and it's by choice. I still do fun things and spend time with friends, but having a relationship just to have someone is not a priority. Meanwhile, my coworkers and people at church keep hinting that the right one will come along soon. Ugh.
You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Extreme exercise.
Almost every ultra runner I know is an addict that traded drinking or substances for running.
As someone who traded drinking for lifting and then had to learn to moderate that, I've never been less surprised by anything. I'm a food addict, which is part of why I took up ultra running. I guess that's a little better than drinking or substances. I feel bad for any alcoholic taking up this sport, as beer is very much a part of the culture. I dislike beer, so this makes it weird for me. There are even beer mile runs, where you drink as much beer as you can, usually at several stops along the mile. Aid stations will often have Fireball or other shots late at night. Many races are expected to serve beer at the finish line. You can't really get away from it.
I was about to give you crap for saying this, but then I quickly realized you're 100% correct. Training hard and working hard for health and fitness is okay, but there are countless people destroying themselves through exercise, ego lifting, a crappy diet, and performance-enhancing substances. A lot of extreme athletes are actually too fit, with heart rates so low that they're at risk of a heart failure.
Yeah, past a certain point, exercise isn't healthy in the conventional sense. High-level athletes, bodybuilders, and others are really pushing their bodies past their natural limits. Mind you, the huge majority of non-professionals never reach this point, so if anyone's reading these comments thinking, so it's healthier to not exercise? No, that's absolutely not the takeaway. Just do everything in moderation. Spending time on Reddit.
But that's not even socially accepted.
Without using the third-party apps. Plastic surgery. I don't know why we can't admit as a society that social media causes body image issues, that body trends change due to what's seen as popular in that moment. But plastic surgery doesn't fix your self-esteem. Like 90% of the time, cosmetic work gets done due to what you're seeing praised in the media. But when people do it, everyone just responds as long as you're happy. Like, bro, what? That person's body isn't the issue, it's the media. They didn't actually fix anything. That's why so many people who get surgery get it on a repeat basis, because they're never truly satisfied. Sugar.
I need to start cutting it out, as I know that that's why I'm slightly larger and unhealthier than I want to be. But it's so gosh darn addictive, and I hate sweeteners. It's obviously supposed to be addictive, and it works so well.
It's not just you that's addicted, it's the bacteria in your gut. A diet rich in sugars selects for populations of bacteria that crave sugar, and you experience their cravings. Good news is, you can starve them by reducing sugar consumption and replace them with bacteria that prefer other foods. Overeating or drinking. Alcohol, the only substance that you have to explain why you're not taking it. Going through something and going around like nothing happens to you because you're a man. This is real. I was raised by one of those manly men and thought it was how it was supposed to be. Therapy and allowing myself to feel saved my marriage.
Hooch or suntanning, perhaps?
The tanning thing is so weird. I visited my family a couple of weeks ago and they were laughing at me because I put sunscreen on my legs before I went for a hike. They were literally saying, "But we're not going to the beach." Then my mum told me I looked good because I'd caught the sun over the weekend at a wedding I went to. When I said, "Yeah, that's not good, I only had a hat but no sunblock," she told me I should be trying to get a tan. She's well aware I've had multiple precancerous lesions removed from my face, and we are genetically at a very high risk of melanoma.
That's not tanning, that's just getting vitamin D, which is indeed very healthy.
If you do it in a tanning salon or studio, it is tanning. Nail biting.
Yeah, but especially when you bite to the point of pain or bleeding.
I used to do this. I finally broke the habit by keeping my nails trimmed very short and filed. I catch myself every once in a while biting a nail, so I get the clippers out and cut off what's irritating me. Oh yeah, I know an entire family that has had to buy an economy-size box of nail files because if they don't have their nails sanded down to the pink, they'll absently start biting away unconsciously the moment they begin thinking of anything. Crazy.
I also think it's over-exercising. As a child, I frequently hurt myself due to depression and other issues. It's been years now and I don't cut myself anymore, but whenever I feel upset, I will exercise to the point that my muscles will cramp and my body will bruise. When I do this, nobody tells me that I should get help, but instead they compliment me and say how much better I've gotten. It's true I've gotten better, but self-harm differs in so many ways, and this is just one of those ways.
If your large muscles are genuinely bruised through exercise, you definitely need help. That can lead to life-changing health problems or even death. Is it really like that, or do you just do extreme workouts randomly and just get super sore because you don't work out regularly? I mean, if I don't do heavy squats for a month and then knock out multiple sets at heavy weights, I can barely sit down for the next 2 days. Watching adult flicks. It depends on who you are though. Some people can enjoy it without getting addicted, but it can ruin other people's lives.
It's probably way worse of a problem than most people think, at least as easily available and pervasive as it is.
I remember stumbling across one of those hot games sites back in the early 10s. Embarrassing to say the least, but looking back, it's a miracle I didn't get hacked and had info stolen. Then there's the links to the weird stuff. Stuff that could really put the differences between atheists and Christians aside. People forget that stuff can get really dark and harmful, especially to the dumb hormonal kids who don't know any better. I have the aching suspicion it'll be our generation's cigarettes. I think a lot of people aren't really informed about what addiction actually means. It's not harmful to you if it doesn't bother you in your life in any way. Everything else is just Christian purity bullcrap.
I think a lot of people assume that it isn't harmful if it doesn't have an obvious negative impact on your life, because adult flicks have never been this accessible until maybe 15 years ago. The full effects are not well studied or understood. The main harm that I've read is how it can condition you to expect a very intense degree of arousal, but without any of the other factors that come with doing the deed, mainly things like touch or vulnerability. Again, it isn't incredibly well studied, and the stuff I did read didn't find that degree of conditioning to be widespread.
Social media. Surprised this isn't higher up. It's like self-harm for the mind. It has terrible physical effects as well.
Like hunchback. My brother in Christ, you're saying this on a social media app. Don't throw stones.
Smoking cigarettes. This is the obvious answer, I think. Certainly it would have been in my youth. One of the best things that has happened in the US in my life is the decline in smoking, especially public smoking. Smoke used to be everywhere. Ugh. Getting fat. The source? Me. I didn't have the balls to take my own life quickly, so I aimed to kill myself slowly with cake, chips, and ice cream. Joke's on me though. A few years of hedonism was good for perspective after a stress-induced breakdown. Health took quite a massive hit, but at least I'm still here to recognize that, and the rebuild over recent years has been quite pleasant.
It sounds like you found a way to survive during a difficult time, and you should feel proud of how far you've come, instead of feeling shame for what you went through.
Oh, shame is my whole bit, unfortunately. Toxic self-talk has been a constant wrestle, but a strong routine helps against these things. It's now 4:30 a.m. and I'm about to make my way to the gym. Your progress is awesome. It's really hard to stay away from really unhealthy things. It gets pushed in your face everywhere, and it's designed to make us like it. The same with booze. It's everywhere, although it's super dangerous if consumed too much, just because some very powerful people make a lot of money on this stuff. Good on you for getting better, even with the obstacles.
I used to get my dopamine from ice cream, and now I'm diabetic. Yay!
I banned myself from Ben & Jerry's. It's too gosh darn sweet. Overworking and self-deprecation. Starvation. Eating disorders. Being thin is literally a beauty standard, and it's incredibly unhealthy. Having a dangerously low BMI is just as unhealthy as being morbidly obese. Eating disorders are literally the deadliest mental health diagnoses, in part due to all the comorbidities, and yet people idolize and glorify thinness to an unreasonable degree.
Gym bros and their insane diets that are genuinely just eating disorders. No one actually wants to eat 2,000 calories of plain chicken and rice.
I like chicken and rice. I really enjoy my steady diet based on the same main dishes every day. For me, it was diced chicken breast with salt and some Italian-style dry seasoning, plain rice with a splash of olive oil, and a side of whatever frozen vegetables were cheap at the moment. I'd have oatmeal for breakfast, then 2 big chickens during the day and some eggs in the evening. Day after day after day, the same things. It was great, so efficient and so easy to prepare. I don't bother counting and gym broing anymore, but still chicken rice is something I eat a lot.
That sounds a lot better than just plain chicken and rice. Yeah, efficient and quick meals are very nice.
Chicken and spicy rice, like Nando's style, is my favorite meal, but I cannot imagine a giant plate full of plain and likely unseasoned chicken with just plain rice. I had that when I had bad flu as a kid, and I would never want to eat it outside of that.
Unrestrained consumption of processed food, obsession with reality shows, and an overusage of technology.
Dieting. Not all diets, of course, but 1,000-calorie ones, or diets that completely cut off big food groups, or insane stuff like juice diets, are a straight way into eating disorders. Speaking from experience. Self-sabotage. Not sure if it counts, though. Almost all of the answers are about self-destructive behaviors, not self-harming. Deliberate injury to oneself, typically as manifestation of a mental condition, is self-harm. Things like sugar, etc. aren't self-harm.
Using so-called social media.
Voting Tory. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.